The gold pen felt like a weapon in Daniel Hart's hand. Across the marble table, his girlfriend's father smirked, certain the poor schoolteacher would run. 47 pages of legal contempt sat between them. A prenup that labeled Daniel worthless, stripped him of dignity, and promised a marriage built on shame. Claudia, the woman he'd loved for 2 years, stood silent. She wouldn't even meet his eyes. They expected him to walk away. Instead, Daniel did something that would change everything. He signed. But what the Lancaster family didn't know would shatter their world in exactly 127 days. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's dive in. The November wind howled against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Lancaster estate, but inside the cold had nothing to do with the weather. Daniel Hart sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than his car, watching his future crumble into 47 pages of legal document. "Let's be realistic, Mr. Hart." Richard Lancaster's voice carried the smooth condescension of old money. He adjusted his Rolex, a gesture Daniel had learned was Richard's tell when he was about to deliver what he considered a devastating blow. "You're a high school English teacher. You make, what, $48,000 a year?" "47.5, Daniel corrected quietly, his jaw tight. "Even worse." Richard leaned back, fingers steepled. "My daughter is accustomed to a certain lifestyle. This prenuptial agreement simply protects what our family has built over 3 generations." Evelyn Lancaster, Claudia's mother, sat beside her husband like a porcelain statue in Chanel. She hadn't said a word since Daniel arrived, but her expression spoke volumes. Her eyes moved over Daniel's off-the-rack suit jacket, his sensible shoes, his hands, clean but calloused from the woodworking hobby he'd taken up after his wife died. Everything about her gaze said, "Not good enough." "Where's Claudia?" Daniel asked, his voice steadier than his hands. "Our daughter is upstairs," Evelyn finally spoke, her tone as cold as the marble floors. "She understands this is a business discussion. She'll join us when appropriate." "Business discussion," Daniel repeated the words slowly. "We're talking about marriage." "Marriage is business, Mr. Hart." Richard slid the document across the table. The pages made a sharp sound against the polished surface, especially when there's such a significant disparity in assets. Daniel stared at the prenup. Even from a distance, he could see how thoroughly they'd tried to dissect his worth, or lack thereof, in their estimation. "Let me summarize for you," Richard continued, clearly enjoying this. "In the event of divorce, you receive nothing. No claim to any property acquired during the marriage. No stake in Lancaster Holdings. No access to family trusts." He paused. "Claudia retains sole custody of any children, with you permitted supervised visitation at her discretion." Daniel's head snapped up. "Supervised visitation? Of my own children?" "The children Claudia would bear," Evelyn corrected. "We're not discussing your son." The room seemed to tilt. "Excuse me?" "Little—" Evelyn waved her hand vaguely. "What's his name again?" "Tommy." Daniel's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "His name is Tommy. He's 7 years old." "Yes. Well," Evelyn's lips pursed. "The boy from your previous marriage is naturally your responsibility. This agreement pertains to any future children born to you and Claudia." Daniel felt something crack inside his chest. Tommy, his beautiful boy, who still cried sometimes for his mother, who Sarah had loved more than breathing, who Daniel had spent 3 years trying to help heal, reduced to the boy from your previous marriage. "Section 12 is particularly important," Richard went on, oblivious or indifferent to Daniel's reaction. "You agree to maintain separate finances. Your income remains your own, but you contribute 30% toward household expenses." "Wait," Daniel held up a hand. 30% of my income for household expenses in a home I won't own?" "The Lancaster estate will be your primary residence," Richard said smoothly. "We're not unreasonable. 30% is quite fair considering the value of—" "Fair?" Daniel's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You want me to pay rent to live in my own marriage?" "We want you to contribute appropriately," Evelyn interjected. "Surely you don't expect Claudia to support you entirely?" The words hung in the air like poison. Daniel thought of the past 2 years. Meeting Claudia at a fundraiser for childhood cancer research, the one he'd helped organize in Sarah's memory. How Claudia had seemed different from her family, down to earth and genuine, volunteering at the school where he taught, playing with Tommy in the park, wearing jeans and laughing freely. Or had that all been an act? "I'd like to speak to Claudia," Daniel said firmly. "She's given us power of attorney to negotiate. Now." Daniel stood. "I want to speak to my fiancé now." Richard and Evelyn exchanged glances. Some silent communication passed between them, the kind that came from decades of partnership and mutual superiority. Finally, Evelyn lifted a small silver bell from the side table and rang it. The tinkling sound was absurdly delicate given the brutality of the conversation. A young woman in a maid's uniform appeared. "Mrs. Lancaster?" "Tell Claudia her presence is required." The maid disappeared. Daniel remained standing, his heart hammering. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked away seconds that felt like hours. He counted them. 43 seconds, 51, 62. Then he heard footsteps on the curved staircase. Claudia Lancaster entered the room, and Daniel's breath caught the way it always did when he saw her. She was beautiful, honey blonde hair pulled back in a simple twist, gray eyes that could be warm as summer or cold as winter. Right now, they were somewhere in between, carefully neutral. "Daniel," she offered a small smile that didn't reach those eyes. "I see you're reviewing the agreement." "Claudia." He moved toward her, but she remained by the doorway, maintaining distance. "Can we talk? Privately?" "Anything you need to say can be said here," Richard interrupted. "We're all family." "Not yet, we're not." Daniel kept his focus on Claudia. "Please." She hesitated, and in that hesitation, Daniel saw something flicker across her face. Guilt? Pity? He couldn't tell anymore. When had he stopped being able to read her? 5 minutes, she finally agreed. They walked through the mansion, and it truly was a mansion, not merely a house, in silence. Claudia led him to a small sitting room off the main hall, decorated in suffocating shades of cream and gold. She closed the door, but didn't sit. "Claudia, what is this?" Daniel gestured vaguely back toward the room they'd left. "Supervised visitation? No rights to property? I wouldn't even have legal standing in my own marriage." "It's just paperwork, Daniel." Her voice was light, dismissive. "Everyone does prenups now." "Not like this. This isn't about protecting your assets. This is about making sure I know my place." She sighed, and for the first time a crack appeared in her composure. "Daniel, be reasonable. You must understand how this looks. You're a teacher. You live in a rental apartment. You're raising a child on your own." She held up a hand when he started to protest. "I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but my parents have worked hard to build what they have. They're just protecting their investment." "Their investment? You mean you?" "Our future." Claudia's voice rose slightly, then modulated back to calm. "Look, I love you. You know I do. But love doesn't pay the bills. Love doesn't secure futures. My parents are being practical." Daniel stared at her. 2 months ago, you told me you didn't care about money. You said what we had was real. It is real. This doesn't change that. Doesn't it? He pulled the prenup from his pocket. Richard had given him a copy to review at his leisure. "Claudia, this thing gives you complete control over any children we might have. It essentially erases Tommy from our family equation. It treats me like I'm some kind of fortune hunter trying to steal from you." "You're being dramatic." "Am I? Your mother couldn't even remember my son's name." Claudia's face flushed and she looked away. "She's not good with children. You know that." "No, she's not good with my child because he reminds everyone that I had a life before you, that I loved someone before you, that I'm not just some blank slate she can mold into an appropriate son-in-law. That's not fair. None of this is fair." Daniel's control finally slipped. "I lost Sarah 3 years ago. Tommy lost his mother. We've been rebuilding our lives piece by piece, and you came in and made us believe we could be a family again. You played with Tommy. You helped him with homework. You held him when he cried for his mom. Were you faking all of that?" "Of course not." Tears welled in Claudia's eyes, and Daniel wanted to believe they were genuine. "I care about Tommy. I care about you. It's just a formality. It doesn't mean anything." "Then why sign it?" Because she stopped, struggling with something. Because my parents won't approve the marriage without it, and I need their approval. There it was, the truth, finally. Why? Daniel asked quietly. You're 32 years old, Claudia. Why do you need their approval? You wouldn't understand. You've never had money. The words landed like a slap. Daniel actually took a step back. I didn't mean... Claudia reached for him, but he pulled away. No, I think you meant exactly that. His voice was hollow now, emptied of the anger that had sustained him moments ago. I've never had money, so I can't possibly understand what it means to lose it. Daniel, I understand losing something that matters, though. He thought of Sarah's last days, the hospital room, Tommy's small hand in his as they said goodbye. I understand what it means to love something more than your own comfort, more than appearances, more than what people think. Claudia's tears spilled over. This isn't about not loving you. Then what is it about? She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Security, she finally whispered, knowing that I'll be taken care of, that I won't have to worry. You think I wouldn't take care of you? Not the way I need to be taken care of. And there it was again. Another truth sharper than the last. Daniel walked to the window. The Lancaster estate stretched out before him, perfectly manicured lawns, a pool covered for winter, a guest house larger than the apartment where he and Tommy lived. Somewhere out there in the darkness was his neighborhood, his modest world, his life that suddenly seemed impossibly small. I need to think, he said. Daniel, please. I'll give you my answer tomorrow. He left before she could respond, walking back through that massive house, past Richard and Evelyn who watched him with barely concealed smugness, past paintings worth more than he'd earn in a lifetime, past a life he'd thought he wanted. The November air hit him like a blessing when he stepped outside. His 15-year-old Honda sat in the circular driveway, looking pathetic next to the Mercedes and Tesla parked nearby. Daniel sat in the driver's seat for a long moment before starting the engine. His phone rang. Claudia's name appeared on the cracked screen. He let it ring. The drive back to his apartment took 40 minutes through increasingly familiar neighborhoods. Lancaster Heights to Riverside to his complex on the edge of Millbrook. Each mile marked not just distance, but worlds. By the time he pulled into his assigned spot, number 42, faded yellow paint on cracked asphalt, he felt like he'd traveled through different dimensions of possibility. The apartment was dark. His neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had been watching Tommy. Daniel could hear his son's laughter through the thin walls before he even put his key in the lock. "Daddy!" Tommy launched himself the moment Daniel opened the door. "Mrs. Chen taught me how to make dumplings. They were so good. Can we make them tomorrow?" Daniel caught his son, breathing in the scent of his shampoo, the cheap store brand they bought in bulk, nothing like the expensive products in Claudia's bathroom. "Maybe this weekend, buddy." "How was dinner?" Mrs. Chen asked, gathering her things. She was a widow in her 70s, had lived in the complex for decades, and treated Tommy like a grandson. "Enlightening," Daniel said, the word hollow. Mrs. Chen studied his face with the perception of someone who'd survived plenty of life's harder lessons. She patted his arm. "Sometimes the most expensive things cost too much," she said quietly. "And I'm not talking about money." After she left, Daniel went through the bedtime routine on autopilot. Bath. Tommy still liked to play with his toy boats, pajamas, superhero-themed, bought on clearance, teeth brushing, fighting over whether 2 minutes was really necessary. Story time, currently working through The Chronicles of Narnia, 1 chapter each night. "Dad?" Tommy's voice was sleepy as Daniel closed the book. "Is Claudia gonna be my new mom?" Daniel's chest tightened. "Would you want her to be?" Tommy considered this with the seriousness of 7-year-olds confronting big questions. "She's nice, but she's not Mom." "No," Daniel agreed softly. "She's not. But Mom would want us to be happy, right? That's what you always say." "Yes, she would." "Then if Claudia makes you happy, it's okay." Tommy yawned. "Even if she's not Mom." Daniel kissed his son's forehead, breathing in the innocence of a child who still believed the world was fundamentally good. "Sleep tight, buddy. Love you, Dad." Love you more. In his own bedroom, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed he'd once shared with Sarah and pulled out the prenup. 47 pages, he'd thought earlier. Actually 48. He'd miscounted. He read every word. Section by section, clause by clause, Richard Lancaster's attorneys had built a fortress to protect the Lancaster fortune from Daniel's imagined gold digging. But as Daniel read deeper, he found something else. Loopholes. Assumptions. Protections built on sand because they'd been constructed around the belief that Daniel was exactly who they thought he was. A poor school teacher with nothing to offer. They had no idea. Daniel pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts to a name he hadn't called in months. Marcus Brennan, attorney. They'd met through Sarah's cancer treatment. Marcus's wife had been in the same research trial. Both women had lost that fight, bonding their widowed husbands in grief. The phone rang 4 times before Marcus's groggy voice answered. Daniel, do you have any idea what time it is? I need legal advice. It's 11:30 on a Wednesday. I know, I'm sorry, but I need you to look at something. Something in Daniel's voice must have conveyed the urgency. Marcus sighed. Send it over. I'll look at it first thing tomorrow. Thank you. Daniel? Marcus's voice softened. You okay? I don't know yet. After hanging up, Daniel went to his closet and pulled out a box from the top shelf. Inside was a folder he hadn't opened in over a year. Legal documents, letters. A notice from an estate attorney in Seattle. His Uncle James had died 14 months ago. James Hart. The Uncle Daniel had barely known growing up because James had been busy building a tech startup in Silicon Valley. The eccentric uncle who showed up at family holidays with stories from another world. The uncle who'd sent Daniel and Sarah a generous check when they got married with a note. For starting your adventure. And the uncle who'd apparently never forgotten his nephew. Daniel had been so deep in grief when the attorney's letter arrived, so focused on keeping Tommy afloat, that he'd barely registered the contents. He'd signed the papers, filed them away, and continued surviving. Now he read the words carefully. The full inheritance to be transferred to Daniel Hart upon his 35th birthday, as per James Hart's wishes. Total estate value, approximately $10.3 million, including stock holdings, real estate, and liquid assets. His 35th birthday, which was in 127 days. Daniel sat in his quiet apartment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic, and began to smile. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone seeing a path through darkness, a way to answer questions he hadn't known he needed to ask. About Claudia, about the Lancasters, about what people revealed when they thought you had nothing. He picked up his phone and texted Claudia. I'll sign it. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Her response came within seconds. Really? Oh, thank God. I knew you'd understand. I love you. Daniel stared at those 3 words. I love you. Did she? Or did she love the version of him she'd constructed, the grateful poor man who'd be lucky to marry up, the man who'd know his place, contribute his 30%, and never forget he was an intruder in her world? There was only one way to find out. He'd sign their prenup. He'd marry Claudia Lancaster, and for the next 127 days he'd watch carefully. He'd see who she really was when she thought she'd won, when she thought he was locked in, unable to leave, dependent on her family's goodwill. And then, on his 35th birthday, when the inheritance transferred and the balance of power shifted so dramatically they'd never see it coming, Daniel would discover the truth. Would Claudia stand by him then? Would she be the woman he'd fallen in love with, the one who'd seemed to value kindness over net worth? Or would she reveal herself as exactly what her parents had raised, someone who measured human worth in dollar signs? Daniel sent one more text, this time to Marcus. Never mind waiting. I'm signing it, but I need you to do something for me first. Marcus. Name it. Find out everything you can about post-nuptial agreements, specifically about modifying or voiding prenups signed under false pretenses. Marcus. Daniel, what are you planning? An experiment in human nature. That's cryptic as hell. I'll explain after the wedding. Just be ready. Daniel turned off his phone and sat in the darkness of his bedroom. Through the wall, he could hear Tommy's soft snoring. His son, sleeping peacefully, trusting that his father would make the right choices, would keep them safe, would find a way to build a life worth living. Sarah, Daniel whispered to the darkness, to the ghost of the woman who'd taught him what real love looked like. I hope I'm not making a huge mistake. The silence offered no answers, but somewhere in his chest, beneath the hurt and anger and disappointment, Daniel felt something else stirring. Purpose, determination, a fierce need to know the truth, whatever it cost him. He'd sign their prenup, he'd play their game, and when the time came, he'd see exactly what kind of people he was dealing with. The clock on his nightstand clicked over to midnight, Thursday. One day closer to the wedding. One day closer to knowing whether the woman he loved was real or just another beautiful lie wrapped in designer clothes and family money. Daniel lay back and closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind kept circling back to that moment in the Lancaster mansion, to Claudia's tears, to her words. I need their approval. More than she needed him, apparently. More than she needed integrity, more than she needed to be the kind of person who'd stand up for what was right. But maybe, and this was the hope he couldn't quite kill, maybe she'd surprise him. Maybe over the course of their marriage, she'd show him that the woman he'd fallen in love with was still there, buried under years of Lancaster conditioning. Maybe she'd choose him, choose Tommy, choose the life they could build together over the life her parents had planned. And if she didn't? Well, Daniel had already survived losing everything once. He'd buried the love of his life and rebuilt from ashes. If Claudia Lancaster turned out to be exactly what her family had made her, he would survive that too. But he wouldn't survive it quietly, and he wouldn't survive it without making sure everyone knew exactly who these people were. 127 days. That's how long he'd wait to see the truth. That's how long Claudia had to prove she was worth fighting for. And if Daniel was honest with himself in the darkness of his bedroom, listening to his son breathe and feeling the weight of tomorrow's decision pressing down on his chest, he wasn't sure which outcome he was hoping for anymore. He wanted to believe in her. God, he wanted to believe. But wanting and knowing were two different things. So he'd wait. He'd watch. He'd sign their contract and play their game and see what kind of person emerged when they thought they'd won. Because sometimes the only way to see someone's true character was to give them exactly what they thought they wanted. And sometimes the best revenge was simply letting people reveal themselves. The prenup sat on his nightstand, 48 pages of legal contempt. Tomorrow, he'd sign it. Tomorrow, he'd agree to be less than equal in his own marriage. Tomorrow, he'd smile and nod and let Richard and Evelyn Lancaster believe they'd domesticated the poor schoolteacher. But 127 days from now, everything would change, and Daniel Hart would finally have his answers. The morning of the signing arrived with cruel sunshine, the kind of bright winter day that made everything look deceptively cheerful. Daniel stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting a tie he'd borrowed from Marcus because he didn't own one nice enough for the occasion. Tommy watched from the doorway, holding his Captain America action figure. You look fancy, Dad, Tommy said, like when you went to Grandma's funeral. Daniel's hand stilled on the tie. Out of the mouths of children came truths adults tried to avoid. Yeah, buddy, kind of like that. The Lancaster estate looked different in daylight, less imposing somehow, though no less massive. Daniel pulled his Honda up to the circular driveway where a gleaming Bentley now sat alongside yesterday's Mercedes. New players in today's game. Richard Lancaster's attorney was a man named Philip Dorsey, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of smile that never reached past his teeth. He'd brought a notary, a paralegal, and enough gravitas to make signing a birthday card feel like a federal case. Mr. Hart, Philip extended his hand. Shall we proceed? I understand you've reviewed the document. Every word, Daniel said, and meant it. They assembled in what Evelyn called the morning room, though it was nearly noon. Claudia sat beside her mother, wearing a pale blue dress that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent. She looked beautiful and nervous, and something else Daniel couldn't quite identify. Guilty, maybe. Or resigned. Daniel. She stood when he entered, moved toward him, then stopped as if unsure whether she should touch him. Thank you for coming. Wouldn't miss it, he said lightly, and watched her flinch at the edge in his voice. Philip laid out the prenup with ceremonial precision, each page perfectly aligned. Let's review the key provisions one final time, he began, but Daniel held up his hand. Not necessary. I understand what I'm signing. Richard leaned forward, eyebrows raised. You're certain? Because once this is executed, it's binding. There's no going back. I'm aware. Daniel picked up the gold pen they'd provided, probably worth more than his car payment. Where do I sign? Something flickered across Richard's face. Disappointment, maybe, that Daniel wasn't putting up more of a fight. People like Richard enjoyed the conquest more than the victory. Daniel signed on 17 different lines, initialing pages, acknowledging terms, agreeing to his own diminishment with each stroke of expensive ink. The paralegal witnessed, the notary stamped. Philip collected the pages with the satisfaction of a man who'd just won a bet. Congratulations, Philip said, though it was unclear who he was congratulating or for what. You're all set for the wedding. 4 months away, Evelyn added, consulting a leather-bound planner. June 15th. I've already booked St. Catherine's Cathedral and the country club for the reception. Daniel, we'll need your guest list by next week. Keep it under 30 people, please. Our side is already at 200. Daniel felt that familiar tightness in his chest. 30 people. It's a generous allowance, Richard said, given the circumstances. Given that Daniel was poor, he meant. Given that Daniel's people didn't matter. My son will be there, Daniel said quietly. In the wedding party. Silence fell like a guillotine blade. The child from your first marriage? Evelyn's voice could have frosted glass. Daniel, surely you understand that's inappropriate. This is Claudia's day. Having a child from a previous relationship in the wedding party would be... He's 7 years old, Daniel interrupted, his voice harder now. His name is Tommy, and he'll be my best man or I won't be there at all. Claudia touched her mother's arm. It's fine, Mother. Tommy can be there. Claudia, really? I said it's fine. Claudia's voice carried an uncharacteristic edge. He's going to be my stepson. He should be part of the ceremony. It was a small victory, and it shouldn't have felt like pulling teeth, but Daniel took it. He'd learned in his 3 years of single parenthood to celebrate the small wins because they were often all you got. The meeting dissolved after that, Richard and Philip retreating to discuss business, Evelyn disappearing to make phone calls about flower arrangements. Claudia walked Daniel to his car, her heels clicking on the stone driveway. That wasn't so bad, was it? She asked, trying for lightness. Daniel turned to face her. Claudia, your mother wanted to exclude my son from our wedding. She's just old-fashioned about these things. Old-fashioned or just cruel? Claudia's face hardened. That's not fair. You're being oversensitive. Am I? Tell me something. When we get married, where will Tommy fit in this family? He'll fit fine. He'll have his own room in the East Wing. The East Wing? Daniel laughed, the sound sharp. Claudia, he's a 7-year-old boy, not a distant relative you're warehousing. He needs to be near us. Near me. The master suite is in the West Wing. The East Wing is right across the hall. Across a hall that's probably 50 feet wide in a house where he'll be terrified to leave his room at night. Daniel ran his hand through his hair. Do you hear yourself? You're talking about him like he's a piece of furniture we need to find space for. I'm trying to make this work, Claudia's voice rose. Do you think this is easy for me? Trying to balance what my parents want with what you need? Trying to figure out how to be a stepmother when I've never even been around children? You've been around Tommy for 2 years. That's different. That was dating. This is marriage. This is real life. Daniel stared at her, something cold settling in his stomach. What exactly did you think dating was? Practice? A trial run where nothing counted? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, Claudia? Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you're saying the person you were for the past 2 years was just an act. Her eyes filled with tears, and Daniel wanted to feel sympathy, wanted to be moved by them, but something had shifted in him since last night. Some protective barrier had gone up, and her tears couldn't penetrate it. I love you, she whispered. Doesn't that count for something? I don't know anymore, Daniel said honestly. I really don't know. He drove away before she could respond, watching in his rearview mirror as she stood in that massive driveway, small and alone despite being surrounded by wealth. For just a moment, he felt a flicker of the old sympathy, the old desire to protect her. Then he remembered her mother forgetting Tommy's name, remembered the prenup in his glove compartment, remembered that Claudia had stood silent while her father stripped Daniel of dignity. Some things, Sarah had once told him, couldn't be loved away. Some problems weren't fixed by wanting them to be different. The months before the wedding passed in a strange blur of planning sessions Daniel wasn't invited to, and decisions made without his input. Claudia would call him with updates. The flowers would be white roses and peonies. The cake would be 6 tiers. The menu had been selected by a consultant who'd worked with 3 royal families. "Do I get to taste the cake at least?" Daniel had asked during one of these calls. A pause. "I hadn't thought of that. I suppose we could arrange something." "Most couples do that together, Claudia." "Yes, but most couples aren't planning a wedding of this scale. Mother has a system." Mother had a system. Mother had opinions. Mother had taken over completely, and Claudia had let her, and Daniel watched his own wedding plans unfold as if he were a stranger reading about someone else's life. Tommy noticed, of course. Children always did. "Is Claudia mad at us?" he asked one night during dinner, spaghetti from a jar, nothing fancy, in their small kitchen where the cabinet door still stuck and the faucet still dripped, no matter how many times Daniel tried to fix it. "Nobody. Why would you think that?" "She doesn't come over anymore. And when she calls, you look sad." Daniel set down his fork. "Claudia's just busy planning the wedding." Grandma Sarah used to say that being too busy was sometimes just another way of saying something wasn't important enough. Tommy twirled spaghetti thoughtfully. "I heard her tell you that once when you were working too much." The accuracy of the memory, the perfect preservation of Sarah's wisdom in their son's words, made Daniel's throat tight. "Your mom was a smart lady." "The smartest," Tommy agreed. "Do you think she'd like Claudia?" It was the question Daniel had been avoiding for months. He thought about it now, really thought about it. Sarah with her fierce love and fiercer standards. Sarah who'd volunteered at homeless shelters and argued with hospital administrators about patient rights, and once punched a guy who'd been rude to a waitress. Sarah, who'd measured people by their kindness, not their bank accounts. "I think," Daniel said carefully, "your mom would want to make sure Claudia was good to us. Good to you, especially." "Is she?" Tommy asked. "Good to us?" "I'm trying to figure that out, buddy." The wedding date crept closer. Daniel moved through the preparations like an actor in someone else's play, saying his lines, hitting his marks, waiting for the final curtain. He attended exactly 3 planning sessions, each one more surreal than the last. At the first, Evelyn presented him with a list of appropriate readings for the ceremony. Nothing too emotional, nothing too religious, nothing that might make the guests uncomfortable. "What about 1 Corinthians?" Daniel suggested. "The love is patient, love is kind passage." Evelyn wrinkled her nose. "So pedestrian, everyone uses that one. Because it's beautiful. Because it's common." She slid another list across the table. "I've selected 3 options from classical literature, much more sophisticated." Daniel glanced at the options. He didn't recognize any of them. "Claudia, what do you think?" His fiancé looked up from her phone where she'd been scrolling through something for the past 15 minutes. "Whatever mother thinks is best." At the second session, they discussed the wedding party. Daniel's 30-person guest limit had been reduced to 25 because Evelyn had found room for additional country club members. His request to have Marcus as his best man, with Tommy as junior best man, was met with concern. 2 best men is unusual, Philip Dorsey noted. He seemed to be at every planning session, which struck Daniel as odd for an attorney. "Marcus is my closest friend. Tommy is my son. They're both standing up there." "The optics," so Richard began. "I don't care about the optics." Daniel's patience, already threadbare, finally snapped. "You've controlled everything else about this wedding. This is non-negotiable." Claudia touched his hand, the first real contact they'd had in weeks. "It's fine, Daddy. Let him have this." The casual diminishment, "let him have this," as if Daniel were a child being allowed a treat, made something harden further in Daniel's chest. But he accepted the small victory and moved on. The third session was about the rehearsal dinner, which Richard was hosting at his club. Daniel was presented with a list of topics he should avoid in his toast. "Avoid?" Daniel repeated, staring at the list. "You're telling me what I can't talk about in my own toast at my own rehearsal dinner?" We're just trying to help you navigate these waters, Evelyn said smoothly. You're not accustomed to events of this caliber. We'd hate for you to embarrass yourself. By talking about what? My job? My son? How I met Claudia? All three were on the forbidden topics list. Those subjects might make the guests uncomfortable. God forbid anyone at my rehearsal dinner learn anything real about me. Daniel, Claudia's voice carried a warning. They're trying to help. Are they? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like they're trying to erase me. The planning session stopped after that. Daniel received updates via email, formal and impersonal, as if he were a vendor being kept in the loop rather than the groom. He told himself it was better this way. Easier. Less opportunity for conflict. But lonelier, too. Much lonelier. Spring arrived, then early summer. Daniel finished the school year, said goodbye to his students, attended Tommy's second-grade graduation. Claudia came to none of these events. Too busy, she said. Too much wedding planning. But Daniel saw the posts on social media, Claudia at charity galas, at country club events, at her mother's side for luncheons and fundraisers. She wasn't too busy. She just had other priorities. Dad? Tommy asked one night, a week before the wedding. They were packing up the apartment, preparing to move to the Lancaster estate after the ceremony. Do you still want to marry Claudia? Daniel looked at his son, at those wide brown eyes that still saw too much, that had seen death and grief and now were seeing doubt. He thought about lying, about offering easy reassurances. But Sarah had taught him better than that. I want to believe in her, Daniel said honestly. I want to believe she's the person I fell in love with. But you're not sure? No, buddy, I'm not sure. Tommy nodded slowly, processing this with the seriousness of someone older than 7. Grandma Sarah used to say that sometimes you have to give people a chance to show you who they really are. She did say that. Is that what you're doing? Giving Claudia a chance? Daniel pulled his son close, resting his chin on Tommy's head. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. And if she shows you something bad, then we'll deal with it together, you and me, like always. Promise? Promise. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather, as if the universe was mocking Daniel with blue skies and gentle breezes. He dressed in the tuxedo the Lancasters had provided, custom-made, expensive, uncomfortable, in ways that had nothing to do with fit. Tommy looked adorable in his miniature tux, holding the rings with fierce concentration. You ready, best man? Marcus asked, adjusting his own tie. He'd been watching Daniel carefully all morning, concern evident in every glance. Ready as I'll ever be. It's not too late to call this off, you know. Daniel smiled without humor. Yes, it is. I need to see this through. Why? Daniel, seriously, what are you doing? I told you, an experiment in human nature. That's a hell of a reason to get married. I loved her, Daniel said quietly. Or I loved who I thought she was. I need to know if that person is real. St. Catherine's Cathedral was exactly as ostentatious as Daniel had feared. 200 people in designer clothes, an orchestra instead of a simple pianist, enough flowers to stock a nursery. Daniel's 25 guests clustered in the back pews, looking out of place and uncomfortable. Mrs. Chen had worn her best dress, the one she saved for special occasions. His fellow teachers from Millbrook High sat together, whispering nervously. They were good people, real people, and they looked as out of place in this cathedral as Daniel felt in his expensive tuxedo. The ceremony passed in a blur. Claudia looked stunning in a dress that probably cost more than a year of Daniel's salary. She said her vows with tears in her eyes. Daniel said his and tried to mean them. The minister pronounced them married. People applauded. The orchestra played. And through it all, Daniel felt like he was watching from outside himself, observing a stranger's life. The reception was worse. The Lancaster family and their friends talked about stocks and property and people Daniel didn't know. His guests stayed in their corner, politely excluded by hundreds of unspoken social cues. Tommy sat at the head table, looking small and uncomfortable, pushing around the expensive food he didn't recognize. During dinner, Daniel overheard a conversation at the neighboring table. I give it a year, a woman in diamonds said, loud enough to be heard over the orchestra. Maybe 2 if he's smart enough to stay quiet and not rock the boat. Her companion laughed. Evelyn says he's harmless, poor but harmless. Poor is never harmless, darling. It's just quiet until it sees an opportunity. Daniel's grip tightened on his fork. Beside him, Claudia was deep in conversation with one of her bridesmaids about a trip to the Maldives they were planning. She hadn't spoken to Tommy once since they'd sat down. The first dance came. Claudia smiled up at Daniel as they swayed to a song her mother had chosen, something classical and refined and utterly devoid of meaning to either of them. "Happy?" she whispered. "Overjoyed," Daniel said, and watched her miss the irony completely. Later, during the toasts, Richard stood and talked about family legacy and maintaining standards. He never once mentioned Daniel by name. Evelyn spoke about Claudia's beauty and grace, her accomplishments, her bright future. Daniel was described only as Claudia's husband, as if he were an accessory rather than a person. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, he looked out at the sea of expectant faces. These people who judged him, measured him, found him wanting. He thought about the toast he'd prepared, the one that followed all of Evelyn's guidelines, bland and safe and meaningless. Then he looked at Tommy, sitting beside Marcus, both of them watching him with concern and support. "I met Claudia 2 years ago at a fundraiser for childhood cancer research," Daniel began, going off script immediately. "A fundraiser I'd organized in memory of my first wife, Sarah, who died of cancer 3 years ago. Claudia volunteered to help. She spent weeks working with me, with my son Tommy, helping us through that event. She was kind. She was real. She saw us as people worth her time, not because of what we had, but because of who we were." He saw Claudia's face pale, saw Evelyn lean toward Richard with a whisper. "That's the woman I fell in love with," Daniel continued. "That's the woman I married today. And I truly hope, that somewhere under all of this—" He gestured vaguely at the opulent ballroom, the excessive decorations, the performance of it all. "That woman is still there, because that's the woman my son and I need. Not someone who measures worth in dollar signs, but someone who measures it in kindness, in character, in love." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel sat down, his heart pounding. Tommy reached across Marcus to give him a thumbs up. Claudia's face was unreadable. The rest of the reception was strained. People avoided Daniel as if he'd committed some terrible faux pas. Maybe he had, by their standards. He'd told the truth. And in a place like this, among people like this, the truth was the ultimate transgression. The honeymoon was supposed to be 2 weeks in Italy, but Daniel had convinced Claudia to compromise. 1 week, because he couldn't leave Tommy for longer. Even that felt too long. They flew first class, stayed in 5-star hotels, ate at restaurants where the menus didn't list prices, and they barely spoke to each other. Claudia seemed determined to pretend everything was normal, snapping photos for social media, buying designer clothes, acting like they were any happy newlywed couple. Daniel played along, but the distance between them grew with every passing day. On their third night in a hotel room that probably cost more per night than Daniel's monthly salary used to be, Claudia finally confronted him. "You embarrassed me," she said. "At the reception, your toast." I told the truth. "You made it sound like I'm some terrible person, like my family is terrible. Aren't they?" Daniel turned from the window where he'd been staring out at Florence, so beautiful and so wasted on this hollow trip. "Claudia, your mother couldn't remember my son's name. Your father made me sign a contract that essentially says I'm worthless, and you let them. They were protecting me." "From what?" "From me. I've never wanted your money, Claudia. I wanted you, the real you. But I'm starting to think I have no idea who that is." She started crying, and once upon a time those tears would have broken him. Now they just made him tired. "I'm trying," she whispered. "This is hard for me too. Learning to be a wife, a stepmother. You've had 2 years to learn. You haven't spent time with Tommy in months. I've been busy." "Stop." Daniel held up his hand. "Stop hiding behind being busy. You made a choice, Claudia. You chose wedding planning over building a relationship with my son. You chose your mother's approval over standing up for what was right. You chose appearances over reality, and I need you to own that." "You're being unfair. I'm being honest. There's a difference." They cut the honeymoon short after that, flying home in silence, sitting in separate seats that felt like opposite sides of a canyon. When they arrived at the Lancaster estate, his new home, though it would never feel like home, Tommy ran out to greet them. "Dad, I missed you!" His son crashed into him and Daniel held on tight, breathing in the familiar scent of child shampoo and sunshine. "Missed you too, buddy. So much." Tommy pulled back, smiling up at Claudia. "Hi, Claudia. How was Italy?" "It was lovely," she said, her voice brittle. "Very educational." She walked past them into the house without another word. Tommy looked up at Daniel, confused. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, buddy, you did everything right." Living at the Lancaster estate was exactly as uncomfortable as Daniel had anticipated. His and Tommy's rooms were indeed in the east wing, separated from Claudia's master suite by what felt like miles of marble hallway. Tommy was afraid at night in the massive house, the creaks and echoes of a building too large to feel safe. "Can I sleep in your room?" Tommy asked the third night, standing in Daniel's doorway with his pillow. "Of course." Daniel moved over, making room. Tommy climbed in, curling against his side. "I don't like it here, Dad." "I know. When can we go home?" Daniel looked around the guest room that was supposed to be his now, at the expensive furniture and designer curtains and utter lack of warmth. "I don't know, buddy." Claudia withdrew further into her mother's world. She spent her days at the club, her evenings at charity events. She came home late, left early, and when she was around, she treated Daniel and Tommy like inconvenient house guests. 2 months into the marriage, Daniel was grading papers in the estate's library. He'd started teaching summer school, desperate for something normal, something that felt like his real life, when he heard voices from the adjacent sitting room. Claudia was on the phone, her voice carrying through the open doorway. "No, I know, I should have listened to you. You were right." A pause. "It's harder than I thought. The boy is always around, and Daniel expects me to, I don't know, play mother or something." Another pause, then a laugh. "God, no, I'm not cut out for this, but what was I supposed to do? Daniel seemed so safe, you know? A nice guy, a teacher. I thought it would be easy, stable." Daniel's hands stilled on the papers he was grading. "Right, exactly," Claudia continued. "And now I'm stuck in this marriage with a man who barely makes any money and his damaged kid who cries for his dead mother. Mother keeps asking when we're going to have a baby. And honestly, the thought of bringing a child into this mess..." She stopped herself. "Anyway, I just needed to vent. Thanks for listening." Daniel sat frozen as the conversation ended and Claudia's footsteps retreated toward her wing of the house. His damaged kid. Barely makes any money. A nice guy. A teacher. Said with such contempt. He thought about his inheritance sitting in Seattle, gaining interest, waiting for his 35th birthday now just 2 months away. He thought about the prenup in his file at Marcus's office. He thought about Tommy, sleeping poorly every night in this mausoleum, missing their small apartment where the faucet dripped and the cabinet stuck but everything felt like home. And Daniel realized that the experiment was over. He had his answer. Claudia was exactly what the prenup had revealed her family to be. People who measured worth in net worth, who saw kindness as weakness, who would never value what really mattered. But he'd given his word. 127 days, he'd promised himself. Time to see the truth. He had 61 days left. 61 days until his birthday, until the inheritance transferred, until the power dynamic shifted so completely that none of them would see it coming. He could survive 61 more days. For Tommy, for his own peace of mind, for the closure of knowing he'd given this marriage every possible chance. So Daniel went back to grading papers, marking essays about summer vacation and first crushes, surrounded by wealth he didn't want in a house that wasn't home, married to a woman he no longer loved. And he counted down the days until his birthday like a prisoner marking time on a cell wall. 61 days until freedom. 61 days until truth. 61 days until Daniel Hart finally showed the Lancaster family exactly who they'd underestimated. The countdown became Daniel's secret ritual. Each morning, he'd mark another day off the calendar hidden in his desk drawer at school. 60 days. 59. 58. The numbers ticked down with mechanical precision while his marriage crumbled with organic chaos. Claudia stopped pretending entirely after the phone conversation Daniel had overheard. She moved through the estate like they were strangers sharing a hotel, polite when necessary, absent when possible. Dinners became silent affairs when they happened at all. Most nights she ate at her parents' or claimed previous commitments that never included Daniel or Tommy. "Is Claudia sick?" Tommy asked one evening as they ate takeout pizza in Daniel's room. Their room now, really, since Tommy had given up on sleeping alone in the massive East Wing. "She never wants to hang out anymore." Daniel thought about lying, about making excuses, but Sarah's voice echoed in his mind. Protect him from cruelty, but don't lie about reality. He needs to learn to see people clearly. "Claudia is having a hard time adjusting to being married," Daniel said carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt other people without meaning to." "Does she not like us?" The question pierced Daniel's chest like a blade. "I think Claudia likes the idea of us more than the reality of us." Tommy considered this with his characteristic seriousness. "That's sad." "Yeah, buddy, it is." "Are we going to leave?" "Soon," Daniel promised. "Very soon." 47 days before Daniel's birthday, Claudia made an announcement over one of their rare shared breakfasts. Daniel had come down to find her in the morning room, a space so formal that even the sunlight seemed to enter apologetically, picking at a croissant while scrolling through her phone. "I have news," she said without looking up. "I'm pregnant." Daniel's coffee mug stopped halfway to his lips. "What?" "Pregnant. About 6 weeks along. I saw the doctor yesterday." Her tone was flat, as if she were reporting the weather or commenting on stock prices. 6 weeks? Claudia, that's... Daniel did the math. "That's from our honeymoon." "Apparently." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were empty of the joy that should have accompanied such news. "Mother is thrilled, of course. She's already planning the nursery." "The nursery." Daniel set down his mug carefully. "Don't you think we should plan that together?" "Why? You have such strong opinions about interior design?" The sarcasm was new, sharp, and cutting. "I have strong opinions about our child, yes." "Your child is upstairs sleeping. This one is mine." She stood, brushing croissant crumbs from her designer loungewear. "The prenup is very clear about that." Daniel felt the words like a physical blow. "So that's how this is going to be? You're already weaponizing a child that hasn't even been born yet?" "I'm protecting my interests. Isn't that what you'd do?" She paused at the doorway. He cut. "Oh, wait. You don't have any interest to protect. I forgot." She left before Daniel could respond. He sat alone in the morning room, surrounded by expensive furniture and crushing silence, and felt something inside him turn to ice. This was it. The final proof. Claudia wasn't going to change. She wasn't going to become the woman he'd thought she was. She was going to use their unborn child as another tool in her family's arsenal of control and contempt. 47 days. He just had to survive 47 more days. That evening, Daniel called Marcus from the privacy of his car, parked in the far corner of the estate's grounds where no one would overhear. "She's pregnant," Daniel said without preamble. Marcus swore softly. "And let me guess, she's already making it clear the kid belongs to her? Reference the prenup within 2 minutes of telling me." "Daniel, you need to get out of there. File for divorce now before—" "No." Daniel's voice was firm. 47 more days. I need to see this through." "Why?" "What's the point now? You have your answer. She's shown you exactly who she is." "Because if I leave now, she'll paint me as the villain. The poor teacher who married up, got her pregnant, and abandoned her. Her family's lawyers will destroy me, and I'll lose any chance of being in my child's life." Daniel leaned his head against the steering wheel. "But if I wait until my birthday, until the inheritance transfers, everything changes. Suddenly I'm not the fortune hunter. Suddenly, I'm the man who had money all along and chose to see what kind of person she really was. That's one hell of a gamble, brother. It's all I've got." The next weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Evelyn Lancaster descended on the estate with decorators, pediatricians, and a level of enthusiasm she'd never shown for Tommy. The nursery, located in the West Wing naturally, close to Claudia and far from Daniel, became a shrine to excess. Designers brought swatches and samples. Claudia held court, making decisions about a child she discussed as if it were an accessory rather than a human being. "We'll need a night nurse, of course," Evelyn said during one of these planning sessions. Daniel had been summoned to approve expenses, though his approval was clearly a formality. And a nanny. Claudia can't be expected to handle everything herself. What about me? Daniel asked. I'm the father. I'll be handling plenty. The looks exchanged between mother and daughter spoke volumes. You'll be teaching, Claudia said dismissively. Someone needs to contribute financially, after all. The irony was so thick, Daniel could have choked on it. In 42 days, he'd have more money than Claudia could spend in a lifetime, and she was lecturing him about financial contribution. Right, he said mildly. Someone has to pay that 30% household contribution. If Claudia caught his sarcasm, she didn't show it. Tommy, meanwhile, was struggling. His grades had slipped. His teacher at the summer program called to express concern. Daniel found him crying in bed one night, muffling the sound in his pillow. Hey, hey! Daniel gathered his son close. What's wrong? I miss our old apartment, Tommy sobbed. I miss our kitchen and our TV and my room, where I could hear you in the next room. I miss feeling safe. I know, buddy, I know. And now there's going to be a new baby, and Claudia will love it, and she doesn't even love me. Stop. Daniel pulled back to look Tommy in the eye. That baby will be your brother or sister, and you're going to be an amazing big brother. But Claudia's feelings, or lack of them, those aren't your fault. You understand me? You're perfect exactly as you are. Then why doesn't she like me? It was the question Daniel couldn't answer without destroying whatever innocence Tommy had left. So instead, he held his son and let him cry, and promised himself that in 40 days he'd make this right. Somehow, he'd make this right. 35 days before Daniel's birthday, Claudia hosted a garden party to announce the pregnancy formally. 200 guests, champagne, and hors d'oeuvres, a string quartet playing softly. Daniel stood beside his wife, playing the role of supportive husband while inside. He counted minutes until he could escape. He was getting good at performing. Smile here, nod there, accept congratulations from people who'd never bothered to learn his name. He'd become a prop in the Lancaster family theater, and the role was exhausting. Daniel! A voice cut through the crowd. He turned to see Jennifer Morrison, one of the few genuine friends Claudia had made in college, someone she'd gradually distanced herself from as she'd climbed back into her parents' world. I didn't know you'd be here. I'm the father, Daniel said dryly. Seemed appropriate. Jennifer laughed, but her eyes were sad. How are you really? Surviving. That bad? She glanced toward Claudia, who was holding court near the fountain with her mother and a cluster of society women. She's changed, hasn't she? Since the wedding. Since before the wedding, actually. Jennifer touched his arm lightly. For what it's worth, I like the old Claudia better. The one who volunteered at shelters and didn't care about designer labels. The one who seemed real. Me too, Daniel admitted. I liked her a lot. What happened to her? She remembered where she came from and decided that's all that mattered. Later that evening, after the guests had left and the caterers had cleaned up, Daniel found Claudia in the nursery. She was standing in the center of the room, one hand on her still flat stomach, surrounded by luxury goods for a child who didn't yet exist. The party went well, Daniel offered. Mother was pleased. Claudia didn't turn around. That's what matters. Is it? Is that really all that matters? She turned then, and something in her face was different, harder, colder. What do you want from me, Daniel? Really? I want you to be the person I married, the person who laughed at bad jokes and played board games with Tommy and didn't care that I drove a 15-year-old Honda. That person was naive. She didn't understand how the world works. The world? Or your world? They're the same thing. Claudia moved to the designer crib that probably cost more than most people's cars. This baby will have everything, the best schools, the best opportunities, the best life. Can you give a child that on a teacher's salary? I can give a child love, stability, values that matter. Love doesn't pay for Princeton. No, but it teaches kids that people matter more than prestige. Daniel felt his control slipping, felt the anger he'd been suppressing for months rising to the surface. It teaches them that worth isn't measured in dollar signs, that character counts for something. Character is a luxury of the poor, Claudia said dismissively. People who have nothing else cling to character because it's all they have. The words hung between them, so cold and cruel that Daniel actually took a step back. Is that really what you think? It's what I know. She finally looked at him directly. You're a good man, Daniel. Kind, principled, all of that. But goodness doesn't build empires. It doesn't create legacies. It doesn't ensure that your children and grandchildren will never have to worry. My son worries every day, Daniel said quietly. He worries that he's not good enough, that he doesn't fit in, that his stepmother sees him as a burden. No amount of money is worth that. Then maybe you should have thought of that before you married me. Maybe I should have. Daniel moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I hope this baby teaches you something. I hope when you hold your child for the first time, you remember what really matters. I know what matters, Claudia said. I'm just not sure you do. 28 days before his birthday, Daniel overheard another conversation. This time, Claudia wasn't on the phone. She was in the estate's sunroom with 3 of her friends, women Daniel vaguely recognized from the wedding. He'd come looking for Tommy and heard voices, was about to announce himself when he heard his name. Honestly, I don't know what I was thinking, Claudia was saying. A teacher? Mother tried to warn me, but I thought I was being so progressive, so open-minded. The other women murmured sympathetically. At least the prenup protects you, one of them said. Imagine if you hadn't had that. He could have taken you for everything. God, don't even joke about that, Claudia's voice carried clearly through the open door. The only good thing about this marriage is that when it inevitably ends, I'll have full custody and he'll have nothing. The baby will be raised properly, not in some sad little apartment eating cheap pizza. What about his son, the one from before? Not my responsibility. Claudia's tone was dismissive. That's his baggage to deal with. I made it clear from the beginning that I wasn't signing up to be anyone's replacement mother. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. He thought of all the times in those first 2 years when Claudia had played with Tommy, had helped with homework, had seemed genuinely caring. Had it all been performance? Had she been auditioning for the role of wife while planning to discard the inconvenient parts once she'd secured the position? So what are you going to do? Another friend asked. You can't stay married to him forever. I'll wait until after the baby is born. Let him bond a little, just enough that losing custody really hurts. Then I'll file for divorce, cite irreconcilable differences, and let Daddy's lawyers handle the rest. She paused, and Daniel could hear the smile in her voice. He'll be teaching high school for the rest of his life, sending child support checks he can barely afford, while my child grows up with every advantage. It's almost poetic. You've become so ruthless, one of the friends said admiringly. I love it. I've become practical, Claudia corrected. There's a difference. Daniel walked away before he heard more, his heart pounding with rage, and something else. Relief, maybe. Because now he knew beyond any doubt. Now there was no room for hope, no space for what-ifs. Claudia had revealed herself completely, and she was exactly as cruel as her family had raised her to be. 28 days. He could survive 28 more days. He found Tommy in the library, reading one of the Harry Potter books Sarah had loved. His son looked up, and something in Daniel's face must have shown because Tommy's eyes widened. Dad, what's wrong? Daniel sat beside his son, pulling him close. Nothing's wrong. I just wanted to tell you something. Okay. In a few weeks, things are going to change. Change in a big way. Daniel chose his words carefully. And when they do, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? I always trust you. I know, buddy, but this time it's really important. Daniel kissed the top of Tommy's head. No matter what happens, no matter what anyone says, remember that you and I are a team. Always have been, always will be. Are we leaving? Hope crept into Tommy's voice. Soon, very soon. Good. Tommy leaned against his father. I want to go home. Me too, buddy, me too. The final weeks crawled by with agonizing slowness. Daniel went through the motions of his life. Taught his summer classes, graded papers, attended the occasional dinner with Claudia when appearances demanded it. He watched his wife grow more confident, more dismissive, more convinced of her complete control. Evelyn and Richard treated him with increasing contempt now that Claudia was pregnant and the Lancaster legacy was secure. They'd gotten what they wanted, a grandchild with their daughter's DNA and complete control. Daniel was just the sperm donor who'd inconveniently stuck around. "We've been discussing something," Richard said one evening over dinner. Claudia had insisted Daniel attend this particular meal, though she hadn't explained why. "Your teaching salary, inadequate as it is, does contribute to the household expenses per the prenuptial agreement. However, now that Claudia is pregnant, we think it's time you considered a career change." Daniel set down his fork carefully. "A career change. I have a position available at one of my companies," Richard continued. "Middle management, paper pushing mostly, but it pays significantly better than education. You'd be home earlier, could help more with the baby." "Help more," Daniel repeated. "I'm the father. I plan to be very involved." Of course," Richard waved his hand dismissively. "But let's be realistic. Claudia and the nanny will handle the bulk of childcare. We're simply suggesting you make yourself more useful financially. And work for you. It would be a family business." Evelyn's smile was cold. "Isn't that nice? Keeping everything in the family?" Daniel understood the play immediately. Get him working for Lancaster Holdings, make him dependent on their paycheck, ensure he could never leave without losing everything. It was control masquerading as generosity. "I'll think about it," Daniel said, knowing he'd be gone before they could pressure him further. "Don't think too long," Richard said. "The position won't stay open forever." 10 days before Daniel's birthday, Marcus called with news. "I've been doing research on your situation," Marcus said. "That prenup has some interesting loopholes." "Such as?" "It was written under the assumption you had no assets. But if you had assets before the marriage that were simply undisclosed, assets that you were legally entitled to but hadn't yet received, then the prenup was signed under false pretenses. The inheritance wasn't mine yet. Uncle James's will specified my 35th birthday. But the will existed before your marriage. You were the named beneficiary before you signed the prenup. A good lawyer could argue the Lancasters should have asked about future inheritances, that the failure to disclose was their oversight, not your deception. So the prenup might not hold? It might not, especially combined with evidence that you've been a present father, that you've attempted to bond with the child, that Claudia has been the one creating distance." Marcus paused. "Daniel, if you play this right, you might actually get joint custody, maybe more. I don't want more. I just want to be in my child's life. And I want Tommy protected. Then we need to document everything, every interaction, every dismissal, every time Claudia or her parents treat Tommy as less than. You'll need witnesses." "I have witnesses." Daniel thought of Mrs. Chen, of his fellow teachers, of Jennifer Morrison who'd seen Claudia's transformation. "I have plenty of witnesses." 5 days before his birthday, Daniel received a call from the estate attorney in Seattle, the one who'd handled Uncle James's will. "Mr. Hart, I'm calling to confirm the transfer date. Your 35th birthday is December 10th, correct?" "Correct." "And you'd like the funds transferred to the account we discussed?" Daniel had opened a new account months ago, one the Lancasters knew nothing about. "Yes, all of it." "Very good. The transfer will complete at midnight on your birthday. You should have full access by morning." The attorney paused. "Mr. Hart, if I may, your uncle would be very pleased to know this money is going to someone who values people over profit. He spoke of you often." "I wish I'd known him better." "He knew you well enough, said you had your mother's heart and your father's spine, said that combination would take you far." After the call, Daniel sat in his car in the school parking lot and let himself feel it, all of it. The anger at Claudia's betrayal, the grief for the marriage that had never really existed, the fear for his unborn child, the protective fury for Tommy, who'd been treated as disposable by people who should have welcomed him, but also the hope, the fierce, burning hope that in 5 days he'd have the power to change everything. 4 days before his birthday, Claudia made an announcement at dinner. "I've decided on a name," she said, one hand resting on her barely visible baby bump. "If it's a girl, Evelyn Grace Lancaster. If it's a boy, Richard James Lancaster." Daniel stared at her. "You've decided? Don't I get a say? Do you have better suggestions? How about we discuss it together, like parents?" "I am the parent," Claudia said coldly. "You're just the father. There's a difference." Evelyn smiled approvingly. Such beautiful names, darling. Very appropriate. Daniel pushed back from the table. I need air. He walked the grounds of the estate, this massive property that had never felt like home, and called Marcus again. 3 more days, Marcus said before Daniel could speak. You can do 3 more days. She's naming the baby after her parents. Didn't even ask my opinion. Document it. Write it down, date it, save it. Every dismissal, every exclusion, it all helps your case. I don't want a case, Marcus. I just want my kids to be okay. Then trust the process. 3 more days until your birthday. Then we file for divorce, reveal the inheritance, and watch the Lancaster family's faces when they realize who they've been underestimating. 2 days before his birthday, Daniel came home from teaching to find Claudia in the master suite, packing a bag. Going somewhere? He asked. Mother's, just for a few days. I need space. She didn't look at him. The baby needs calm, and you've been so tense lately. I've been tense? Claudia, you've barely spoken to me in weeks. Exactly. It's exhausting being around someone so resentful all the time. She zipped the bag closed. I'll be back after the weekend. My birthday is in 2 days. Is it? She finally looked at him, and her eyes were empty. Well, happy early birthday, I suppose. She left without another word, without a kiss, without even a pretense of affection. Daniel watched her go and felt nothing. The love, the hope, even the anger. It had all burned away, leaving only cold clarity. Tomorrow was December 9th. The next day was his 35th birthday, the day everything changed. That night, Daniel took Tommy out for pizza at their old favorite place near their old apartment. They sat in a booth worn smooth by years of use, ate cheap slices loaded with pepperoni, and for the first time in months, Tommy smiled without reservation. This is the best, Tommy said, cheese stretching from slice to mouth. Can we come here every week? Soon, buddy. Soon we might be able to come here whenever we want. Really? Are we moving back to the apartment? I don't know yet, but things are going to change. Big changes. Daniel reached across the table, taking his son's hand. Tomorrow's my birthday. And the day after that, I'm going to have a conversation with Claudia. A big conversation. About leaving? Maybe. Probably. Daniel squeezed Tommy's hand. Are you scared? Tommy thought about it, his face serious. A little, but mostly I'm excited. Is that bad? No, buddy. That's not bad at all. That night, back at the estate, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay in bed watching the clock tick toward midnight, toward December 10th, toward his 35th birthday, and the inheritance that would change everything. At 11:47 p.m., his phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Ready? Daniel typed back. Ready. At 11:53 p.m., another text, this one from the estate attorney in Seattle. Transfer is processing. Happy birthday, Mr. Hart. Your uncle would be proud. At 11:59 p.m., Daniel got out of bed and walked to the window. The Lancaster estate spread out before him, lit by carefully placed lights, beautiful and cold and never home. At midnight, his phone chimed with a notification from his bank. One new deposit. Amount: $10,347,892 on 16th. Daniel Hart stood in the darkness of his borrowed room and smiled. Not a happy smile, not a victorious smile, just the smile of someone who finally had the power to demand truth. He waited until morning, until a reasonable hour, before making the call. Marcus, the money's in. I saw. Congratulations, by the way. Thanks. Now what? Now you make a choice. Do you want revenge, or do you want resolution? Daniel thought about Claudia, about the baby growing inside her, about Tommy sleeping down the hall. I want truth. I want everyone to see exactly who these people are, and then I want joint custody of my child in a divorce. Then let's give them a birthday surprise they'll never forget. Daniel showered, dressed in his best clothes, which suddenly seemed ridiculous given what was sitting in his bank account, and went downstairs. The house was quiet. Claudia was still at her mother's. The staff moved silently through their routines. Nobody remembered it was his birthday, except Tommy, who'd made him a card with marker and construction paper. Happy birthday, Dad, Tommy said, presenting the card proudly. It had a drawing of them in front of their old apartment with a big sun overhead. I hope this year is better. It will be, buddy. I promise. It will be. At 10 a.m., Daniel called Claudia. I need you to come home. I have something to tell you, something important. I'm busy, Daniel. It's about our future, about the baby, about everything. He kept his voice calm. Trust me, you'll want to hear this. Something in his tone must have convinced her because she agreed. Noon at the estate. She'd bring her parents too, she said, because obviously anything important enough to discuss involved them. Of course it did. The Lancasters did everything as a unit, a fortress of wealth and contempt. Daniel spent the morning preparing. He called Marcus, confirmed the details, called Jennifer Morrison, asked if she'd be willing to provide a statement about Claudia's transformation. She agreed immediately. Called the attorney in Seattle, confirmed all the paperwork was in order. And then, because he was still a teacher at heart, Daniel made notes, talking points, things he needed to say, needed them to hear, needed to be on record. At noon exactly, 3 cars pulled into the circular driveway. Claudia in her Tesla, Evelyn in her Mercedes, Richard in his Bentley. The Lancaster family, armored in German engineering and self-righteousness. They assembled in the formal living room, that space where Daniel had first seen the prenup, where this whole nightmare had begun. Claudia sat beside her mother. Richard took his usual position of power in the leather chair. They all looked at Daniel with barely concealed impatience. Well, Richard said, you've dragged us all here. What's so important? Daniel stood before them, hand steady, voice calm. This was it. The moment he'd been counting down to for months. I want a divorce, he said simply. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before Evelyn laughed. A divorce? Daniel, really? You can't be serious. Completely serious. Claudia's face had gone pale. You're leaving me? While I'm pregnant? No, Claudia. I'm leaving the version of you that's been revealed over these past months. The person who treats my son like a burden, who measures worth in dollar signs, who is already planning to divorce me and take my child. He watched her face change, saw the moment she realized he'd heard that conversation. Yes, I heard you. In the sunroom, talking about how you'd wait until the baby was born just to make losing custody hurt more. That was... I didn't mean... You meant every word. Daniel turned to Richard and Evelyn. And you two have been complicit in every bit of cruelty. The prenup designed to humiliate me. The constant reminders that I'm not good enough. The treatment of my son as if he's disposable. Richard stood, his face dark with anger. How dare you speak to us this way? We've given you everything. You've given me nothing but contempt. Daniel's voice remained calm, which somehow made it more powerful. But that's not why I'm really here. I'm here to tell you something you don't know, something that changes everything. What could you possibly tell us that would change anything? Evelyn's tone was condescending. You're a teacher. You have nothing. Actually, Daniel said and smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. I have quite a lot. As of midnight last night, I inherited $10 million from my late uncle's estate. The silence that followed was absolute. Claudia's face went white. Evelyn's mouth opened and closed without sound. Richard actually sat back down, hard. You're lying, Richard finally said. This is some kind of joke. No joke? Daniel pulled out his phone, showed them the bank statement. $10,347,892.16. My Uncle James died over a year ago. His will specified the inheritance would transfer on my 35th birthday. Today. He watched them process this, watched the recalculations happening behind their eyes. I've been wealthy this entire time. I just didn't have access to it yet. Why didn't you say anything? Claudia's voice was barely a whisper. Because I wanted to see who you really were. I wanted to know if you'd love me without money, if you'd treat Tommy with kindness, if you'd be the person I thought I married. Daniel looked at his wife, at the mother of his unborn child. You weren't. You showed me exactly who the Lancaster family raised you to be, and I'm grateful for that clarity. Daniel, wait. Claudia stood, moved toward him. This doesn't have to change anything. It changes everything, Daniel said firmly. And here's what's going to happen next. I'm filing for divorce. My lawyers will contest the prenup on the grounds that it was signed under false pretenses. Your lawyers assumed I had no assets when, in fact, I had a substantial inheritance pending, and I'm going to fight for joint custody of our child." "You'll never win," Richard blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. "The prenup is ironclad. The prenup is flawed. My lawyers have already identified multiple issues, but more than that, I have evidence. Months of evidence of Claudia's neglect toward Tommy, her statements about planning to exclude me from our child's life. Witnesses who will testify to her transformation from the kind woman I dated to the cruel person she became." Daniel looked at each of them in turn. "I don't want your money. I never did. I just want to be a father to both my children. And I want Tommy to grow up knowing that kindness matters more than bank accounts." Claudia was crying now, real tears streaming down her face. "Daniel, please. I love you. I can change. I can be better." "Can you?" Daniel asked quietly. "Because I've given you months to show me that, and you've chosen cruelty every single time." "I was scared," Claudia sobbed. "Scared of disappointing my parents, scared of not being good enough, scared of everything. But I can change. Give me a chance to prove it." Daniel looked at her, at the woman he'd loved, at the mother of his unborn child. He thought about walking away clean, about taking his money and his son and starting over somewhere far from the Lancaster empire. But then he thought about the baby, his child, who hadn't asked for any of this, who deserved better than parents who hated each other, who deserved at least the chance of a family. "1 month," Daniel heard himself say. "You get 1 month to prove you can change." "But there are conditions." "Anything," Claudia said desperately. "I'll do anything. You move out of this estate. You cut yourself off from your parents' money. You get a real job, not some vanity position at one of your father's companies. You learn to be a mother to Tommy, to actually care about him instead of seeing him as an obstacle. And you prove to me that you can value character over wealth." "That's impossible," Evelyn gasped. "Claudia can't survive without—" "Then she's not worth saving," Daniel said flatly. "And I'll raise our child to understand that people's worth isn't measured in their bank accounts." He walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at Claudia one final time. "You have until January 10th, 1 month from today. Show me the woman I fell in love with still exists somewhere under all this Lancaster conditioning." He pulled out an envelope, handed it to her. "This is the address of a modest apartment I've rented. It's in a normal neighborhood with normal people. Tommy and I will be there. If you want to prove you can change, that's where you'll find us." He walked out of the Lancaster estate without looking back, went upstairs, and found Tommy reading in their shared room. "Hey, buddy, want to go home?" Tommy's face lit up like sunrise. "Really? Right now?" "Right now. Pack your important stuff. We're leaving." They packed quickly. Clothes, books, Tommy's action figures, the few things that mattered. The expensive toys Evelyn had bought, the designer clothes, the trappings of Lancaster wealth. They left it all behind. As Daniel loaded the last box into his Honda, Marcus pulled up in his own car. "You did it," Marcus said, grinning. "You actually did it." "Did I? Or did I just make the biggest mistake of my life?" "Giving her a chance to prove herself? That's not a mistake. That's mercy." Marcus helped lift the box. "Though I gotta say, I didn't see that coming. I thought you'd walk away for sure." "I thought I would too." Daniel looked back at the mansion, at the life he was leaving behind. "But I keep thinking about the baby, about what Sarah would want me to do. She'd want me to fight for family, to give people a chance to be better than they are." "Sarah was a better person than most of us," Marcus said gently. "Yeah, she was." Daniel opened the car door. "Come on, Tommy, let's go home." They drove away from the Lancaster estate as afternoon light slanted through winter trees. In the rear-view mirror, Daniel could see Claudia standing in the doorway, watching them go. She looked small and lost, and maybe, just maybe, like she was beginning to understand what she'd almost thrown away. But understanding and changing were two different things, and Daniel had no idea which way this would go. All he knew was that in 1 month, on January 10th, he'd have his answer. Either Claudia would prove that people could change, could choose love over money, could become who they should have been all along, or Daniel would file for divorce, fight for his children, and build a life that measured success by laughter and kindness instead of net worth and social status. Either way, he was finally free. Free from pretense. Free from performing. Free to be exactly who he'd always been. A teacher, a father, a man who'd loved and lost and learned that some things were worth more than any inheritance. $10 million sat in his bank account. But driving toward their new apartment with Tommy humming beside him and hope flickering like a candle in a dark room, Daniel understood that the real fortune had nothing to do with money. It was measured in second chances, in the possibility of redemption, in the fierce love between a father and son. And in exactly 30 days, Daniel would know if that fortune was worth sharing or if he'd be building it alone with the people who'd always truly mattered. The apartment Daniel had rented was nothing like the Lancaster estate. It was a modest two-bedroom in a working-class neighborhood called Riverside, the kind of place where kids rode bikes in the parking lot and neighbors borrowed sugar. The walls were beige, the carpet was worn, and the kitchen faucet had that familiar drip Daniel remembered from their old place. Tommy stood in the doorway of his new room and smiled wider than he had in months. "It's perfect, Dad," he said, running to test the bed. "I can hear you in the next room. I won't be scared at night." Daniel felt something tight in his chest loosen. "Yeah, buddy, no more east wings." They spent the afternoon unpacking, arranging furniture, making the space feel like home. Daniel had bought basic necessities, sheets, dishes, a used couch from a consignment shop. After months of Lancaster excess, the simplicity felt like medicine. That evening, they ordered Chinese takeout and ate on the floor because the dining table hadn't been delivered yet. Tommy used chopsticks and laughed when he dropped noodles, and Daniel thought about how much he'd missed this, the easy comfort of their small life together. "Do you think Claudia will come?" Tommy asked, swirling lo mein around his fork. "I don't know, buddy. I honestly don't know." "Do you want her to?" It was the question Daniel had been asking himself since he'd walked out of the Lancaster estate. Did he want Claudia to prove she could change? Or had he given her an impossible test, setting conditions he secretly hoped she'd fail so he could walk away with a clear conscience? "I want her to try," Daniel said finally. "For the baby's sake. For your sake, even. Everyone deserves a chance to be better than they are." "Grandma Sarah used to say that," Tommy observed. "She said people could surprise you if you gave them room to grow." "Your mom was full of wisdom. I miss her." "Me too, buddy. Every single day." 3 days passed. Daniel returned to teaching at Millbrook High, where his colleagues welcomed him back with knowing looks and quiet support. Word had gotten around somehow, maybe through Mrs. Chen, maybe through the neighborhood grapevine, that Daniel had left his wealthy wife. Nobody asked for details, but the lunchroom ladies started packing extra food in Tommy's lunch, and the principal mentioned that the school had recently received an anonymous donation for their struggling families fund. Daniel didn't mention the $10 million sitting in his bank account. That money felt abstract still, like numbers on a screen rather than something real. He'd grown up without wealth, built his life on a teacher's salary, and the inheritance hadn't changed his daily routine. He still drove his Honda, still shopped at the discount grocery store, still lived like the person he'd always been. On the 4th day, a knock came at the apartment door. Daniel opened it to find Claudia standing in the hallway, wearing jeans and a simple sweater he didn't recognize. No designer labels visible. No jewelry except her wedding ring. She had a single suitcase beside her and looked terrified. "Hi," she said quietly. "Can I come in?" Daniel stepped aside. Claudia entered slowly, taking in the modest space with wide eyes. This was probably the smallest home she'd been in since college. "Where's Tommy?" she asked. "At Mrs. Chen's, our neighbor. She watches him sometimes after school." Daniel crossed his arms. "You came. You said 1 month. I'm here to start it." Claudia set down her suitcase. "I found a job. It starts Monday. Nonprofit work, helping coordinate community programs. The pay is terrible, but they said I could learn." Daniel felt surprise flicker through him. "You got a job already?" "I called Jennifer Morrison. She works in nonprofit development. Did you know that? She's been wanting to get back in touch for years, but Mother always discouraged it. Said Jennifer was beneath us now." Claudia's voice cracked slightly. "Jennifer helped me. Even after how I treated her, she helped me." That's what good people do. I'm learning that. Claudia looked around the apartment again. Where will I stay? I don't want to impose. The couch pulls out. You can sleep there. Daniel's tone was firm. I'm not sharing a room with you, Claudia. Not until you prove this is real. She nodded, accepting this. That's fair. And tomorrow, you're spending the day with Tommy. Just you and him. No distractions, no excuses. You're going to learn to be his stepmother. I don't know how. Then figure it out. That's what parents do. Daniel moved toward the kitchen. There's leftover Chinese in the fridge if you're hungry. I need to pick up Tommy. He left before she could respond, needing air, needing space to process the fact that Claudia had actually shown up. Part of him had been certain she wouldn't, that the lure of her parents' money and comfort would be too strong. But she was here, in jeans and uncertainty, and Daniel didn't know what to feel about that. Mrs. Chen met him at her door with knowing eyes. She came? The older woman asked. How did you? I saw her in the hallway, looking lost. Mrs. Chen smiled gently. Everyone deserves a second chance, Daniel. Even people who've made terrible choices. What if she can't change? Then you'll know you gave her every opportunity, and your conscience will be clear. She patted his arm. But maybe give her a real chance, not just a test designed to make her fail. The words stung because they held truth. Daniel collected Tommy and walked back to their apartment, preparing his son for what waited inside. Claudia's here, Daniel said. She's going to be staying with us for a while. Tommy's face was unreadable. Is she going to be mean again? I don't know. But she says she wants to try to be better. Can you give her a chance? Will you be here too? Always, buddy. I'm not going anywhere. They entered the apartment to find Claudia had unpacked some of her things and was sitting nervously on the pull-out couch. When she saw Tommy, something flickered across her face, fear maybe, or regret. Hi, Tommy, she said softly. How was school? Tommy looked at his father, then back at Claudia. It was okay. We learned about the solar system. That sounds interesting. Which planet did you like best? Saturn, because of the rings. Tommy edged closer to Daniel. Did you really get a job? I did. I start Monday. I'll be helping organize after-school programs for kids. Claudia's hands twisted in her lap. Maybe someday you could come to one, if you wanted. Maybe, Tommy said noncommittally. The evening passed in awkward politeness. Daniel made spaghetti for dinner, from a jar, simple and cheap, and watched Claudia eat without complaint. They did dishes together in the tiny kitchen, working around each other carefully. Tommy did homework at the kitchen table, and Claudia asked about his assignments with what seemed like genuine interest. At bedtime, Tommy hugged Daniel goodnight, then paused. Good night, Claudia, he said, the words formal and careful. Good night, Tommy. Sleep well. After Tommy's door closed, Daniel and Claudia sat in the living room with the uncomfortable silence of two people who'd shared a bed but no longer knew how to talk to each other. Thank you, Claudia finally said, for giving me this chance. Don't thank me yet. You haven't proven anything. I know. She pulled her knees up, looking young and vulnerable in a way she never had at the estate. Daniel, I need to tell you something about the baby. Daniel's stomach dropped. What about the baby? Nothing's wrong medically. The baby's fine. But I've been thinking about what you said, about how I was already planning to use our child as a weapon against you, about naming the baby without your input. She took a shaky breath. I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be my mother. Then don't be. It's not that simple. I've spent my whole life learning to be her, learning that worth is measured in net worth, that people like you, people with character and kindness, are naive. Weak. Claudia's eyes filled with tears. But watching you walk away, seeing you choose Tommy over wealth, over comfort, over everything my family said mattered, it broke something in me. Or maybe it woke something up. I don't know which. Why did you agree to the prenup? Daniel asked. In the beginning, when you and I first started dating, you seemed different, real. What changed? Claudia was quiet for a long moment. I got scared. We were getting serious, and I knew if I brought you home, my parents would never approve. So I started pulling away from the person I was with you. Started remembering all the lessons they'd taught me about protecting myself, about the importance of family legacy. And by the time they demanded the prenup, I'd convinced myself they were right. You convinced yourself I was beneath you. Yes. The admission was painful. And I'm so sorry, Daniel. I'm sorry for how I treated Tommy. I'm sorry for everything I said, everything I did. I know words don't fix it. I know I have to show you through actions, but I need you to know I'm aware of how badly I failed. Both of you. Daniel looked at his wife, and she was still his wife, still carrying his child, and saw something he hadn't seen in months. Shame, yes, but also determination. The question was whether that determination would last beyond the discomfort, beyond the novelty of playing poor. Tomorrow, Daniel said, you're taking Tommy to the park, just you and him. No phones, no distractions. You're going to play with him, talk to him, learn who he actually is instead of seeing him as an obligation. I can do that. Can you? Because Tommy's been through enough, Claudia. He lost his mother. He's been treated like an inconvenience by your family for months. If you're going to be in his life, you need to actually care about him. Not perform caring, actually care. I want to, Claudia whispered. I want to learn how. The next morning, Daniel watched from the apartment window as Claudia and Tommy walked toward the park 3 blocks away. Tommy's body language was stiff, uncertain. Claudia walked beside him with visible nervousness. Daniel wanted to follow them, to supervise, to protect his son from more disappointment, but that would defeat the purpose. Claudia needed to figure this out on her own. They were gone for 2 hours. Daniel graded papers, checked his phone obsessively, and tried not to imagine all the ways this could go wrong. When they returned, Tommy was smiling. Dad, Claudia pushed me on the swings and I went so high, and we fed the ducks and she taught me how to skip rocks. Tommy's excitement was genuine, unforced. She's actually pretty cool when she's not at the mansion. Claudia stood behind Tommy and her expression was complicated, happy but also sad, as if she was realizing how much she'd missed. We had a good time, she said simply. I can see that. After Tommy ran to his room to change out of his muddy clothes, Claudia approached Daniel. He told me about Sarah, she said quietly, about how she used to take him to that park, about their favorite bench, their favorite duck. He's been carrying so much grief, and I never even asked about it. I just saw him as your baggage, instead of as a little boy who lost his mother. And now? Now I see him. Claudia's voice broke. I see him, and it breaks my heart that I wasted so much time being cruel when I could have been building something real. It was a start. Not forgiveness, not resolution, but a start. The days that followed established a rhythm. Claudia went to her new job where, according to Jennifer's reports, she was struggling but trying. She came home exhausted, unused to actual work, but she didn't complain. She spent evenings with Tommy, helping with homework, learning his favorite books, asking about his day with what seemed like genuine interest. Daniel watched it all with cautious hope and persistent doubt. Was this real change or elaborate performance? Was Claudia becoming a better person, or just playing a role until she could reclaim her old life? 2 weeks into the month, Richard Lancaster showed up at the apartment. Daniel opened the door to find his father-in-law standing in the hallway, looking profoundly uncomfortable in the modest building. I need to speak with my daughter, Richard demanded. She's not here. She's at work. Work? Richard said the word like it was foreign. This has gone on long enough, Daniel. Claudia belongs at home, not playing house in some rundown apartment. This isn't a game, Daniel said coldly. And she's not playing. She's learning who she could have been all along if you hadn't spent 32 years teaching her that people's worth is measured in their portfolios. You self-righteous... Richard stopped himself, visibly controlling his anger. You think you've won because you inherited some money? You're still the same poor schoolteacher who got lucky. Money doesn't change breeding. You're right, Daniel said. Money doesn't change breeding, which is why no amount of wealth will ever make you or your wife decent human beings. Richard's face went dark. I could destroy you. You could try, but I have $10 million and the moral high ground. You just have money. Daniel started to close the door. Tell Evelyn that Claudia will call when she's ready. If she's ready. But right now she's learning that the world doesn't revolve around Lancaster expectations. He closed the door on Richard's sputtering protests. That evening, Claudia came home to find Daniel cooking dinner. Nothing fancy, just chicken and rice, while Tommy set the table. "My father came by," Daniel said without preamble. Claudia froze. "What did he want?" "You, back under their control." Daniel watched her carefully. "He called this playing house, said you belong at the estate." "What did you tell him?" "That you're an adult making your own choices. But Claudia, you need to understand something. Your parents aren't going to make this easy. They're going to pressure you, manipulate you, try to convince you that this," he gestured around the small apartment, "is beneath you." "I know." Claudia set down her work bag. "He's been calling me. Mother too. I haven't answered." "Why not?" "Because I'm afraid if I talk to them, I'll slip back. I'll remember all the reasons they gave me to see you and Tommy as less than, and I can't do that, not anymore." She moved into the kitchen, standing beside Daniel at the stove. "This chicken smells good." "It's just chicken." "At the estate, we had a chef who made complicated meals I couldn't pronounce. But this smells like home, like something real." Claudia looked at Tommy, who was carefully folding napkins the way Daniel had taught him. "I've been so stupid, Daniel, chasing a version of life that was all appearance and no substance." "Words are easy, Claudia." "I know, but I'm trying to match them with actions. Jennifer told me about the work you did before we met. The cancer research fundraisers, the volunteer tutoring, all the ways you gave back even when you had nothing to give." Claudia's voice was soft. "I used to do that too. Before I let my parents pull me back into their world. I used to volunteer at homeless shelters, used to tutor kids in underserved schools. I was happy then." "What happened?" "I fell back into their orbit, started caring what they thought, what their friends thought, started measuring my worth by their standards instead of my own." She touched her stomach where the baby was beginning to show. "I don't want this child growing up like that. I don't want to be the kind of mother who teaches our daughter or son that money matters more than character." Tommy looked up from his napkin folding. "Are you going to stay? For real?" Claudia met the boy's eyes, and Daniel saw something genuine pass between them. "I want to. If you'll let me. If your dad will let me." "We'll see," Daniel said carefully. "You've got 2 weeks left." But something was shifting. Daniel could feel it in the way Claudia laughed more easily now, in how she'd started buying groceries and learning to cook simple meals, in the way she asked Tommy about his day and actually listened to the answers, in how she came home with donated books for the after-school program and talked excitedly about helping kids who reminded her of someone she used to be. 3 weeks into the month, Claudia made an announcement at dinner. "I did something today," she said, nervous energy crackling around her. "I donated $500,000 to cancer research, in Sarah's name." Daniel's fork clattered against his plate. "What?" "I still have access to my trust fund. I've been avoiding using it because I wanted to prove I could live without money, but then I realized, having money isn't bad. It's what you do with it that matters." Claudia pulled out her phone, showed him the confirmation. "I donated it to the same research hospital where Sarah was treated. They're going to name a new wing after her. The Sarah Hart Memorial Research Center." Daniel couldn't speak. Tommy looked between them, confused. "Who's Sarah?" he asked quietly. "Your mom," Claudia said gently. "And she was an amazing person who fought really hard. She deserves to be remembered. She deserves to have her name on something that will help other people fight the same battle." Tommy's eyes filled with tears. "Really? They're going to remember Mom?" "Really, and whenever we want, we can go visit the center. We can see her name and know that even though she's not here, she's still helping people." Tommy got up from the table and, to everyone's surprise, hugged Claudia. She stiffened for a moment, then wrapped her arms around the boy, tears streaming down her face. Daniel watched them and felt something crack in his chest. The walls he'd built, the protective distance he'd maintained, it was crumbling in the face of what looked like genuine transformation. That night, after Tommy was asleep, Daniel and Claudia sat on the small balcony of the apartment. The December air was cold, but they'd bundled in blankets, drinking hot chocolate Daniel had made on the stove. "The Memorial Center," Daniel said. "That was remarkable. It was the right thing to do. Sarah gave Tommy to the world. She gave you to the world. The least I can do is make sure she's not forgotten." Claudia stared into her mug. I've been thinking about something Jennifer said. She told me that who we are in private when no one's watching, that's our real character. And I realized I've spent years performing, being who my parents wanted in public, being hollow in private. I don't want to be that person anymore. Change is hard, especially when everything in your life is pulling you back to old patterns. Is that why you set the 1-month test? To see if I could sustain it? Claudia looked at him. You didn't think I'd make it, did you? Honestly, no. I thought you'd last maybe a week before running back to the estate and your parents' money and your comfortable life. I almost did. That first week, I'd wake up on that pull-out couch in a strange apartment and I'd think about my bedroom at the estate, the soft sheets, the space, the ease of it all. And I'd reach for my phone to call Mother. Claudia smiled sadly. But then I'd hear Tommy in the next room, or I'd smell coffee brewing, and I'd remember why I was here. Not because of money or appearances, but because I wanted to be someone my child could be proud of. The baby? Both children, Tommy and the baby. I want them both to see me as someone who chose love over comfort, who chose being real over being right. She touched her stomach. I felt the baby move yesterday, first time, and I realized I was terrified not because I don't know how to be a mother, but because I'm afraid of becoming my mother, afraid of teaching our child all the wrong things. Daniel reached over and took her hand. It was the first intentional touch they'd shared since he'd left the estate. You're not your mother, he said. You're choosing differently. Am I? Or am I just performing again, playing the role of reformed rich girl until I get what I want? That's the question, isn't it? That's what this month is supposed to answer. And what's your answer? Do you believe I've changed? Daniel looked at his wife, really looked at her for the first time in months. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by Target jeans and thrift store sweaters. The carefully maintained hair and makeup had given way to a more natural look. The constant phone checking and social media posting had stopped. She looked younger, somehow. Freer. But more than the surface changes, there was something different in her eyes. A clarity that hadn't been there before. A presence. Like she was actually inhabiting her life instead of performing it. I think you're trying, Daniel said carefully. And that's more than I expected. Is trying enough? I don't know yet. Ask me in 1 week. The final week of the test arrived with a cold snap that froze pipes and made the apartment's heating system work overtime. Claudia didn't complain about the cold or the cramped space or the reality of middle-class winter. She wrapped herself in blankets, helped Tommy with his science project, and went to work at the nonprofit where she was slowly earning respect through actual effort. On Christmas Eve, exactly 25 days into the month, Daniel came home to find the apartment transformed. Not with expensive decorations, but with handmade ones. Paper snowflakes hung from the ceiling. Tommy's drawings decorated the walls. A small tree stood in the corner, nothing like the elaborate 15-foot designer tree at the Lancaster estate, covered with popcorn strings and construction paper ornaments. We made decorations, Tommy announced proudly. Claudia showed me how to make snowflakes with 6 points instead of 8. It's science! Claudia emerged from the kitchen, flour on her face, looking happier than Daniel had seen her in a year. We're baking cookies, she said. They're probably terrible, but Tommy wanted to try his mom's recipe. You had it written down in your recipe box, and I thought, I hope that's okay. I should have asked first. Daniel looked at the mess in the kitchen, at the flour handprints on the counter, at Tommy beaming with genuine joy, at Claudia wearing Sarah's old apron that he'd packed away in a box because it hurt too much to see. It's perfect, he said, his voice rough with emotion. They spent Christmas Eve eating slightly burned sugar cookies and watching Christmas movies on the old TV Daniel had bought at a pawn shop. Tommy fell asleep between them on the couch, and Claudia gently moved him to his bed, tucking him in with a tenderness that seemed to come naturally now. He's a special kid, she said when she returned to the living room. Yeah, he is. I almost missed knowing him. I almost threw away the chance to be part of his life because I was so focused on what my parents would think. Claudia sat beside Daniel, carefully maintaining some distance. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I haven't earned that. But I want you to know I see what I almost lost. And I'm grateful you gave me this chance to see it. Christmas morning arrived with snow and the sound of Tommy's excited footsteps. Daniel had bought modest presents, books, art supplies, a new bike from the secondhand store. Claudia had somehow found Sarah's favorite children's book in a first edition and wrapped it for Tommy with a note. From one book lover to another, love, Claudia. Tommy cried when he opened it, clutching the book to his chest. Mom used to read this to me, he said through tears, every night when I was little. I know, Claudia said softly. Your dad told me, and I thought maybe we could read it together sometimes, if you want, not to replace your mom, but to remember her. Tommy looked at Claudia for a long moment, then nodded. I'd like that. That evening, Evelyn Lancaster called. Claudia answered this time, stepping onto the small balcony for privacy. Daniel could hear muffled voices through the glass door, Evelyn's sharp tones, Claudia's quieter responses. The conversation lasted 10 minutes and ended with Claudia simply hanging up. She came back inside, her face pale but determined. Mother demanded I come home for New Year's, said this experiment in poverty has gone on long enough. Claudia met Daniel's eyes. I told her no. I told her I'm building a life that matters, with people who matter, and that's more important than maintaining appearances at a party full of people who measure worth in stock portfolios. What did she say? That I'm making the biggest mistake of my life, that I'm throwing away everything they've built for me. Claudia's voice shook slightly. That if I don't come home by New Year's, I'll be cut off from the family entirely. How do you feel about that? Terrified. Relieved. Both. She touched her stomach. But I realized something today. Watching Tommy open that book. Watching him smile without fear or reservation. This is what family is supposed to feel like, not performance, not obligation, just people who care about each other, trying their best. December 31st arrived, exactly 1 month since Daniel had walked out of the Lancaster estate. He woke that morning knowing the test was officially over, knowing he needed to make a decision about their future. Tommy was at Mrs. Chen's for a New Year's Eve sleepover with her grandkids. Claudia and Daniel had the apartment to themselves for the first time since she'd arrived. They sat at the small kitchen table with coffee and the weight of unspoken questions. It's been a month, Claudia said quietly. I know you need to make a decision about us, about whether you believe I've changed. Daniel had spent the past month watching his wife transform. Or had she transformed? Had she simply revealed who she'd been all along, buried under years of Lancaster conditioning? He didn't know which, and he wasn't sure it mattered. What mattered was the woman sitting across from him now, the woman who'd donated $500,000 to cancer research, who'd learned to make Tommy laugh, who came home exhausted from real work and didn't complain, who'd chosen love over comfort every single day for 30 days. I've been thinking about something Sarah used to say, Daniel began. She said that people show you who they are through their choices, not their words, not their intentions, but their actual choices when things get hard. And what have my choices shown you? That maybe the woman I fell in love with wasn't an act. Maybe she was always there, just buried under pressure and expectations and fear. Daniel reached across the table, took Claudia's hand. You've made hard choices this month. You've chosen discomfort over ease. You've chosen Tommy over your parents' approval. You've chosen to be someone our child can be proud of. Does that mean... Claudia's voice broke with hope. It means I believe you've changed. Or more accurately, that you've become who you were meant to be before your family convinced you that wealth was worth more than character. Daniel squeezed her hand. But Claudia, you need to understand something. I'm not going back to the Lancaster estate. I'm not going to live under your parents' roof or their rules. If we're going to make this work, it has to be on our terms. I don't want to go back either, Claudia said quickly. I want this apartment, this life, this honesty. I want to raise our children in a home where kindness matters more than appearances. Even if it means being cut off from your family? They cut themselves off from me the moment they demanded I value money over morals. Claudia's voice was steady now, certain. I choose us. I choose Tommy and this baby and you. I choose being real over being comfortable. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest, some knot of grief and anger and fear finally releasing. This wasn't the ending he'd expected when he'd signed that prenup a year ago. It wasn't even the ending he'd expected when he'd walked out of the estate a month ago. But maybe it was the ending Sarah would have wanted. Second chances. Redemption. The fierce choice to become better than you were. Okay, Daniel said simply. Then we try. Really try. Not as a test, but as partners. Claudia started crying, relief and joy mixing in tears that looked nothing like the manipulative ones Daniel had seen so many times before. These were real, raw, human. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for seeing something worth saving. Thank you for proving there was something worth saving. They sat together in their small apartment kitchen as afternoon light faded into evening, holding hands across cheap IKEA furniture, and began to rebuild. Not a marriage based on prenups and property divisions, but one built on the hard work of becoming people worthy of each other. When midnight struck and fireworks lit up the neighborhood sky, they stood on their small balcony watching Tommy's favorite display, the one visible from the park where he used to go with Sarah. And Claudia leaned against Daniel, her hand on her growing belly, and whispered a promise into the winter air. I'm going to be better every day. For them? For us? For whoever I was supposed to be before I forgot. And Daniel, thinking of Sarah, thinking of second chances, thinking of the long road ahead, believed her. The new year brought changes that rippled through their lives like stones dropped in still water. Claudia moved her few belongings from the pull-out couch to Daniel's room, and for the first time since their wedding, they shared a bed as partners rather than strangers performing marriage. The intimacy was tentative at first, rebuilding trust through small gestures, a hand held during sleep, morning coffee made without asking, the quiet acknowledgement that they were choosing each other daily. January settled into routine. Daniel returned to teaching full-time after the holiday break, his students welcoming him back with the easy affection of teenagers who sensed their teacher had weathered something significant. Claudia continued at the nonprofit, where her initial struggles had transformed into genuine competence. She came home with stories about the kids in the after-school program, about Julio, who was reading above grade level now, about Maya, who'd opened up about her family situation, about the small victories that measured success and changed lives rather than changed portfolios. Tommy blossomed under the attention of two parents who were actually present. His grades improved, his nightmares decreased, and slowly, carefully, he began to call Claudia Mom when he forgot to be cautious, then started using it intentionally, testing whether she'd accept the title. She did, every time, with visible emotion that never seemed performed. 3 weeks into January, on a Saturday morning that dawned clear and cold, Claudia woke Daniel with unusual urgency. "We need to talk," she said, her hand pressed to her rounded belly. "About the baby. About everything." They sat at the kitchen table. Their kitchen table now a place where decisions were made together, and Claudia pulled out a folder Daniel hadn't seen before. "I've been working with a lawyer," she began. "Not your lawyer, a different one. Someone Jennifer recommended who specializes in family law." Daniel felt anxiety spike. "Claudia, wait, let me finish." She opened the folder. "I want to void the prenup entirely. Not contest it, not modify it. Void it. It was built on assumptions that were false, yes, but more than that, it was built on values I don't want anymore. I don't want our marriage to have any legal document suggesting you're less than equal." "You're sure?" "Completely sure. And I want to establish a proper custody agreement, not one that gives me full control, but one that recognizes you as an equal parent. Joint custody, joint decision-making, everything." Claudia's eyes were bright with determination. "And I want to adopt Tommy, legally, if he'll let me. I want him to be my son, not just my stepson." Daniel couldn't speak for a moment. "You want to adopt Tommy?" "I want him to know he's chosen, not tolerated, not accommodated, but chosen. I want him to have a mother again, if he'll have me. I know I can never replace Sarah, I would never try, but I can be someone who loves him completely." Claudia's voice broke. "He asked me the other day if I'd still be his mom if you and I got divorced, and my heart broke because he's spent so long being afraid people will leave him. I want to legally promise I won't, ever." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd love him no matter what happened between you and me, that he's stuck with me now." She smiled through tears. "And he hugged me, Daniel, really hugged me, and whispered, "I love you, Mom," so quietly, I almost didn't hear it. Daniel felt his own eyes burning. He said that? He said that. And I realized I'd been so focused on proving myself to you that I hadn't understood the real gift you'd given me. Not another chance at our marriage, but the chance to be Tommy's mother, to love a child who knows what loss feels like and chose to trust me anyway. They sat in their small kitchen, crying together, as morning light streamed through windows that overlooked a parking lot instead of manicured grounds. And Daniel understood that wealth had never been about money. It had always been about this: people choosing each other, choosing love, choosing to be better than circumstances suggested they should be. The adoption process began that week. Tommy was involved in every step, his opinion valued, his feelings prioritized. When the social worker asked if he wanted Claudia to be his legal mother, he said yes without hesitation. "She's already my mom in my heart," Tommy explained with the simple wisdom of 8-year-olds. "This just makes it official." February brought Valentine's Day and Claudia's birthday. Daniel planned something simple, dinner at a modest Italian restaurant, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and a violinist who played slightly off-key. It was nothing like the expensive restaurants they'd gone to while dating, nothing like the lavish celebrations the Lancasters favored. Claudia cried when she saw it. "This is perfect," she said, squeezing his hand across the red checkered cloth. "This is real." "I can't give you the life your parents gave you," Daniel said quietly. "I know I have money now, but I don't want to live like that. I don't want Tommy or the baby growing up thinking worth is measured in dollar signs." "Good, because I don't want that either." Claudia touched her belly, now visibly swollen with their daughter. They'd learned it was a girl at the ultrasound the week before. "I want her to grow up like Tommy's growing up, knowing the value of hard work, understanding that kindness matters, learning that the best things in life aren't things at all." "Your parents would hate hearing you say that." "I know." Claudia's smile was sad but certain. "They've called 37 times since New Year's, left messages saying I'm throwing my life away, that I'll regret this, that I'm choosing poverty over prosperity." "Do you? Regret it?" "Not even for a second." She leaned forward. "Daniel, I have everything I need. A man who challenges me to be better. A son who's teaching me what real love looks like. A daughter on the way who'll never question whether she's valued based on her bank account. What could possibly be better than that?" They ate cheap pasta and shared a dessert and walked home through February cold, and Daniel thought about how happiness had nothing to do with square footage or thread count. It was measured in Claudia's laugh, unguarded and real, and how she stopped to look at Valentine's displays in store windows with genuine delight rather than calculating their cost. In the way she hummed while doing dishes, a habit she'd never shown at the estate because there'd always been staff to handle such pedestrian tasks. March arrived with Tommy's spring break and an unexpected visitor. Daniel answered the apartment door to find Richard Lancaster standing in the hallway, looking even more uncomfortable than his last visit. "I need to speak with you," Richard said stiffly. "Both of you." Claudia emerged from the bedroom, her pregnancy now obvious, and stiffened when she saw her father. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "May I come in?" Richard's request was so uncharacteristic that both Daniel and Claudia exchanged surprised glances before stepping aside. Richard entered the modest apartment, taking in the second-hand furniture, the art projects on the refrigerator, the small space that held more warmth than his mansion ever had. He stood awkwardly in the living room, a man completely out of his element. "Your mother sent me," he began, then stopped himself. "No, that's not true. I came because I needed to see for myself." "See what?" Claudia's voice was guarded. "Whether this was real, whether you'd actually chosen this," he gestured vaguely, "over everything we gave you." "I chose love over luxury, Dad." "Yes." Richard was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother is furious. She says you've embarrassed the family, thrown away your heritage, betrayed everything we taught you." "I know what Mother thinks. Is that why you came, to tell me that?" "No." Richard moved to the window, staring out at the parking lot. "I came because I've been watching you. The social media post stopped, but Jennifer Morrison's been giving updates to your mother's bridge club, about your work at the nonprofit, about the memorial wing for Daniel's first wife, about the adoption proceedings for the boy. His name is Tommy, Dad, and yes, I'm adopting him. I know his name. Richard turned back to face them. I know his name now. I didn't before, and that's my shame to carry. He looked at Daniel. You were right, what you said when you left, about us measuring worth in dollars instead of character, about raising Claudia to value all the wrong things. Daniel didn't respond, too shocked to find words. I've spent 3 months watching my daughter be happier in a rundown apartment than she ever was in a mansion. Watching her work harder for a nonprofit salary than she ever worked for anything in her life. Watching her become a mother to a child she didn't give birth to with more dedication than I've seen in most biological parents. Richard's voice roughened. And I've had to confront the fact that we failed her, Evelyn and I. We taught her to be afraid of anything that didn't come with a price tag. We taught her to measure people by their bank accounts. We taught her that love was secondary to legacy. Why are you telling us this? Claudia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I'm proud of you. The words seemed torn from Richard. For the first time in your life, you've made choices based on conviction rather than comfort. You've chosen to be someone of substance, and I'm proud of you. I don't know if that matters anymore, if I've lost the right to say it, but I needed you to know. Claudia was crying now, silent tears tracking down her face. It matters. It matters a lot. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to come back to the estate or to reestablish connection with your mother. She's still convinced you'll come to your senses eventually. But I wanted to meet my grandson. Richard looked toward Tommy's closed bedroom door. If you'll allow it, I want to know the boy you've chosen as your son. And I want to be in my granddaughter's life, if you'll let me. Not as Lancaster the businessman, but as a grandfather who's learning that there are more important things than quarterly reports. Daniel and Claudia looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Claudia nodded. Tommy, she called, can you come here for a minute? Tommy emerged from his room, book in hand, and stopped when he saw Richard. Tommy, this is my father, your grandfather, if you're okay with that. Claudia's voice was gentle. He'd like to get to know you, but only if you're comfortable. Tommy looked at Richard with the assessing gaze of a child who'd learned to read adults carefully. Are you going to be mean to my dad? Richard blinked, startled. No. I was wrong to be unkind to your father. I'm hoping to do better. And you won't make Mom go back to being sad and scared? Is that how she was? At the estate? Yeah, she smiled a lot, but her eyes were sad. Now she smiles and her eyes are happy too. I don't want the sad eyes to come back. Richard looked at his daughter, seemed to see her clearly for perhaps the first time. No, I don't want that either, and I promise I won't try to change her back. Tommy considered this, then nodded. Okay. Do you want to see my solar system project? I got an A. And just like that, with the easy forgiveness of children. Tommy led his grandfather to the kitchen table to show him a model of planets made from painted styrofoam balls. Richard listened with what appeared to be genuine interest, asking questions, praising Tommy's work, becoming grandfather rather than patriarch. Claudia leaned against Daniel, watching them. I never thought I'd see my father sitting at a kitchen table looking at a third-grade science project like it was a business presentation worth billions. People can surprise you, Daniel said quietly. He still has a long way to go. They both do. Mother probably won't ever come around. But he's trying. That's something. It's everything, Claudia corrected. It's proof that it's never too late to choose differently. April brought spring in Claudia's baby shower, organized by Jennifer Morrison and the women from the nonprofit. It was held in the community center where Claudia worked, decorated with handmade streamers and a cake from the local grocery store. The guests were a mix of nonprofit colleagues, neighbors from the apartment complex, teachers from Tommy's school, and Marcus with his new girlfriend who taught kindergarten. Richard attended, looking profoundly out of place but making genuine effort to engage with people he would have dismissed as beneath notice 6 months earlier. Evelyn had been invited but declined, sending an expensive gift with a card that read simply, "For my granddaughter. Perhaps one day you'll understand." The gift remained unopened in the corner. Claudia opened presents from people who'd spent more thought than money, handmade blankets, gently used books, a photo album filled with pictures of Tommy and Daniel and Claudia over the past months, documenting the transformation of their family. Mrs. Chen gave Claudia a pair of jade bracelets that had belonged to her own mother. "For protection," Mrs. Chen said, clasping them on Claudia's wrists, "and for luck, but mostly to remind you that family is built by choice and commitment, not by blood and obligation." Claudia hugged the elderly woman, both of them crying, and Daniel watched his wife be embraced by a community that valued her for who she was rather than what she had. This was wealth, he thought. This was legacy. Not trust funds and real estate, but connections built on authenticity and sustained by genuine care. The party ended with Tommy presenting Claudia with a drawing he'd made. Their family of 4, holding hands under a sun with rays like fingers reaching across the sky. In Tommy's careful third-grade handwriting, he'd written, "My family is love." Claudia framed it and hung it in the apartment's living room, in the place of honor where the Lancasters would have hung expensive art. May brought the adoption finalization. They stood in family court, Daniel, Claudia, Tommy, Marcus, Jennifer, Mrs. Chen, and Richard, who'd asked permission to attend, while a judge made official what had already been true in their hearts. "Thomas James Hart," the judge said, using Tommy's full legal name. "You're now legally the son of both Daniel Hart and Claudia Lancaster Hart. Do you understand what that means?" "It means I have 2 parents who chose me," Tommy said clearly, "and a sister who's coming soon. It means I'm not alone anymore." The judge smiled, her eyes suspiciously bright. "That's exactly what it means. Congratulations to your family." Tommy hugged Claudia first, whispering something that made her cry. Then he turned to Daniel. "I have 2 moms now, Dad. One in heaven and one here. Is that okay?" "That's more than okay, buddy. That's perfect." They celebrated with pizza at Tommy's favorite place, the one near their old apartment. Richard joined them, attempting to navigate the foreign territory of paper plates and red plastic cups with admirable grace. "This is good pizza," Richard said, sounding surprised. "Best in the city," Tommy declared. "Way better than the fancy food at your mansion." "You might be right about that." Watching her father eat cheap pizza with tomato sauce on his chin, while Tommy explained why pepperoni was scientifically the superior topping, Claudia felt a wave of emotion so strong she had to step outside for air. Daniel followed, finding her on the sidewalk, one hand on her very pregnant belly, crying and laughing simultaneously. "You okay?" "I'm perfect. I'm watching my father be human for maybe the first time in his life. I'm legally Tommy's mother. I'm about to have a baby girl who'll grow up knowing that kindness matters more than bank accounts." Claudia wiped her eyes. "How did this become my life? How did I get so lucky?" "You chose it. You fought for it. You earned it." "We earned it," she corrected. "You could have given up on me. You should have given up on me. But you didn't, and that made all the difference." June arrived with heat and urgency. Claudia's due date was the 15th, but Grace Elizabeth Hart, named not after Evelyn Lancaster, but after Sarah's middle name, a choice Claudia made to honor the woman who'd loved Daniel first, decided to arrive 3 days early. Daniel was teaching when he got the call from Jennifer. Claudia's water had broken at work. She was heading to the hospital. He needed to come now. He left his classroom in the capable hands of another teacher, collected Tommy from school, and drove to the hospital where Marcus met them with calm efficiency. Richard arrived shortly after, having been called by Jennifer, looking terrified in a way corporate boardrooms had never managed to achieve. "Is she okay? Is the baby okay?" "She's fine," Jennifer assured him. "Labor's progressing normally. She's asking for Daniel and Tommy." They found Claudia in a labor and delivery room, breathing through contractions with determined focus. Her face lit up when she saw them. "You came," she said to Richard, genuine surprise in her voice. "Of course I came. You're my daughter. You're having my granddaughter." Richard moved to her bedside awkwardly, clearly unsure what to do. "I'm proud of you, for all of it, for being strong enough to rebuild yourself." "I love you, Dad," Claudia said through tears and pain. "Even when I was angry, even when I was hurt, I never stopped loving you." "I love you too. I should have said it more. Should have shown it better." Richard looked at Daniel. "Take care of my girls." Always, Daniel promised. Tommy held Claudia's hand through contractions, his small face serious with the weight of being part of something miraculous. Between contractions, Claudia talked to him about what to expect, about how his sister was coming to join their family, about how much Grace was going to love having him as a big brother. "I'll teach her everything I know," Tommy promised, "about solar systems and good pizza and why it's okay to cry when you miss someone. And I'll tell her about both grandmas, Grandma Sarah and Grandma Evelyn, so she knows where she came from." Grace Elizabeth Hart arrived at 11:47 p.m. on June 12th, weighing 7 pounds and 2 ounces, with her mother's eyes and her father's determination. The moment they placed her on Claudia's chest, everything else fell away. The pain of labor, the exhaustion, the anxiety. There was only wonder and gratitude and overwhelming love. Daniel cut the umbilical cord with shaking hands. Tommy, allowed in the room because they'd requested it, stared at his baby sister with naked adoration. "She's so small," he whispered. "I'm going to protect her forever." "I know you will, buddy." Richard stood in the corner crying openly, all corporate stoicism abandoned in the face of new life and second chances. Later, when Claudia and Grace were resting, when Tommy had fallen asleep in the chair beside his mother's bed, Daniel stepped into the hallway to call Mrs. Chen with the news. He found Richard there, staring out a window at the hospital parking lot. "Thank you," Richard said without preamble. "For what?" "For not giving up on her. For seeing something worth saving when everyone else, when I had convinced her she was only valuable for her last name and her trust fund." Richard's voice was rough. "I watched my daughter give birth to my granddaughter in a public hospital instead of the private facility Evelyn had selected. I watched her hold that baby with more genuine joy than I've seen in 30 years of her life, and I realized that everything I thought mattered doesn't matter at all. It's never too late to learn that. Isn't it? I'm 63 years old. I've spent my entire life building an empire that means nothing if my daughter won't inherit it. If she's happier working for a nonprofit, living in an apartment, measuring wealth in love instead of stock options. Maybe the empire was never the point," Daniel suggested gently. "Maybe the lesson was learning what happens when you build the wrong thing." Richard laughed, the sound bitter and self-aware. "You're wiser than I gave you credit for. Than I gave anyone credit for who didn't have a portfolio I could evaluate. People keep surprising you when you actually pay attention to them." "Yes, they do." Richard turned from the window. "I'm changing my will. Not to punish Claudia, but to support the life she's chosen. Setting up trusts for the children, yes, but also endowing her nonprofit, establishing scholarships for kids like Tommy who've lost parents to illness, creating something that matters beyond profit margins." "That's remarkable." "It's late, and it's probably not enough to make up for decades of getting it wrong. But it's a start." Richard extended his hand. "You're a good man, Daniel Hart, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." Daniel shook his father-in-law's hand, feeling the strange weight of reconciliation and new beginnings. They stayed in the hospital for 2 days, establishing breastfeeding, learning how to care for a newborn, watching Tommy fall completely in love with his little sister. Friends visited, Jennifer with flowers, Marcus with a teddy bear that was really too large for the hospital room, Mrs. Chen with soup and wisdom. The Lancaster family's absence was notable. Evelyn never called, never visited, maintaining her position that Claudia had made her choice and would need to live with it. But Richard came every day, holding his granddaughter with the tentative care of someone learning a new language late in life. "She looks like you did," he told Claudia on the second day. "When you were born, before we taught you to be anything other than yourself." "I barely remember being that person." "Neither do I. But I see glimpses of her now, and how you are with Tommy, with Grace, with Daniel. You're who you should have been all along." Richard touched Grace's tiny hand with one finger. "I'm going to try to be better. For them. For you. It's too late to fix how I raised you, but maybe I can do better as a grandfather than I did as a father." "It's not too late, Dad. It's never too late to choose differently." They brought Grace home to the small apartment on a sunny June afternoon. Tommy had helped Daniel hang a welcome home banner made from construction paper and markers. The apartment was filled with gifts from neighbors, casseroles and diapers and offers to babysit. Mrs. Chen had somehow organized a meal train, ensuring the new family would have home-cooked dinners for the next 2 weeks. This was community, Daniel thought. This was what mattered. Not the Lancaster estate with its staff in isolation, but this building where people knew each other's names, where help was offered freely, where a new baby was celebrated by people who had little to give except themselves. Claudia settled into the rocking chair, a gift from Richard, who'd researched extensively to find the most ergonomic option, with Grace at her breast and Tommy curled at her feet, reading aloud from one of his favorite books so his sister could hear his voice. "This is perfect," Claudia said, looking around their small living room with its secondhand furniture and handmade decorations. "This is everything." July brought heat and the rhythm of new parenthood. Sleepless nights and early morning feedings, the wonder of watching Grace discover her hands, Tommy's pride every time his sister smiled at him. Daniel took paternity leave from teaching, and they existed in a bubble of diapers and lullabies, and the particular exhaustion that comes from loving something more than sleep. Claudia continued her work at the nonprofit, arranging flexible hours that allowed her to bring Grace to the office when needed. The kids in the after-school program loved having a baby around, taking turns gently rocking her carrier while they did homework, lowering their voices instinctively when she slept. Richard visited weekly, transforming from corporate titan to devoted grandfather with surprising grace. He learned to change diapers, to warm bottles, to walk Grace around the apartment at 3 a.m. when she was fussy and her parents were beyond exhausted. He read to Tommy, asked about school, attended a soccer game in the summer heat without complaint. Evelyn remained absent, a ghost haunting their story through her notable silence. Claudia mourned the mother who chose pride over love, but she was healing too, building a different kind of family from people who showed up and stayed. August brought Tommy's 9th birthday and an unexpected delivery. A package arrived addressed to Claudia from an attorney's office in Connecticut. Inside was a letter from Evelyn and a check for $5 million. The letter was brief. "Claudia, I cannot support your choices, but I acknowledge they are yours to make. This money is yours, from my personal inheritance, not the Lancaster family trust. Do with it what you will. Perhaps one day your children will understand what you've thrown away. Perhaps they'll be grateful you chose differently. Time will tell. Your mother, who loves you even when she doesn't understand you." Claudia read the letter 3 times, crying quietly, while Daniel held Grace and Tommy read the card that had come with his grandmother's birthday gift, a savings bond she'd opened in his name. "What are you going to do with it?" Daniel asked gently. "Give most of it away," Claudia said without hesitation. "Keep enough for the kids' education, for emergencies. The rest goes to causes that matter. Cancer research in Sarah's name, the nonprofit, scholarships, things that change lives instead of just maintaining wealth." "You're sure?" "Completely sure. Money was never what I needed from my mother. I needed her to see me, to value who I am instead of who she wanted me to be. And she can't do that, may never be able to do that." Claudia wiped her eyes. "But I can use her money to do good in the world. I can turn Lancaster wealth into something that matters. That's my choice to make now." September arrived with cooler weather and Tommy's return to 4th grade. Grace was 3 months old, sleeping in longer stretches, smiling regularly, beginning to track faces with her dark eyes. Richard had become a permanent fixture in their lives, showing up for Sunday dinners, pushing Grace's stroller through the park, learning that happiness had nothing to do with the size of your house or the make of your car. One evening, as September sunset painted their apartment walls gold, Claudia sat with Grace while Tommy did homework at the kitchen table and Daniel prepared a simple dinner. Richard was there too, having dropped by after work, his tie loosened and his corporate armor slowly dissolving into something more human. "I've been thinking," Richard said, watching his daughter cuddle his granddaughter with natural ease, "about legacy, about what we leave behind." "And what conclusion have you reached?" Daniel asked, stirring pasta sauce. "That I've been building the wrong thing. The company will outlive me, yes, but it's empty. It employs people, creates profit, exists in the world, but it doesn't mean anything." Richard looked at Tommy, absorbed in his math worksheet, with the determined focus of a child who took learning seriously. "But this? What you've built here? This means everything." "It's just a family, Dad," Claudia said softly. "There's no just about it. Family is the only thing that matters. real family, built on choice and commitment rather than obligation and expectation. Richard moved to the window, looking out at the parking lot where kids played basketball in the fading light. "I'm selling the estate." Claudia's head snapped up. "What?" "Your mother and I don't need that much space. It's a monument to all the wrong values. I'm selling it, downsizing to something reasonable, and using the proceeds to fund the foundation I'm starting in Sarah Hart's name. Cancer research, family support services, scholarships for kids who've lost parents to illness." Richard's voice was firm with new purpose. "I can't get back the years I wasted being the wrong kind of man, but I can try to do better going forward." "What does Mother say about this?" "Your mother and I are separating," Richard said quietly. "Not divorcing, she'd never agree to that, too concerned about appearances, but living separately. She's chosen to maintain the life we built. I'm choosing to build a different one." The announcement settled over the room like snow, soft and transformative. "Dad, I'm sorry." "Don't be. This isn't tragedy, Claudia. This is liberation, for both of us." Richard smiled, and it reached his eyes for maybe the first time since Daniel had known him. "Your mother is happy with her charity luncheons and country club status. That's her choice, and I respect it. But I'm choosing differently. I'm choosing to be the kind of grandfather who shows up, the kind of father who values who you are, the kind of man who measures success in changed lives instead of quarterly earnings." Tommy looked up from his homework. "Does this mean you'll come to my soccer games more?" "Every single one," Richard promised. "And Grace's recitals when she's older, and whatever Tommy's sister wants to do. I'm going to be there for all of it." "Cool," Tommy said, returning to his math with the easy acceptance of children who take love as it comes. October brought Halloween and Grace's first costume, a pumpkin outfit that made everyone who saw her smile. Tommy dressed as a scientist, complete with lab coat and safety goggles, explaining to anyone who'd listen about the importance of STEM education. They trick-or-treated through their neighborhood, Richard accompanying them with visible delight, carrying Grace when Claudia's arms got tired, helping Tommy navigate curbs in the dark. At one house, an elderly neighbor commented on what a lovely family they made. "Are you the grandfather?" she asked Richard. "I am," Richard said, and the pride in his voice was unmistakable. "These are my grandchildren, Tommy and Grace." Walking home with bags of candy and tired children, Daniel reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. A prenup designed to humiliate him. A marriage built on money and contempt. An inheritance that changed everything by revealing what mattered and what didn't. And now this. A family rebuilt from broken pieces, stronger because they'd chosen it rather than inherited it. November brought Thanksgiving and a dinner that would have been impossible a year ago. They gathered in the apartment. Daniel, Claudia, Tommy, Grace, Richard, Marcus and his girlfriend, Jennifer and her husband, Mrs. Chen and her extended family. 20 people crammed into a space meant for half that many, eating turkey Daniel and Richard had cooked together, sharing stories and laughter and the easy intimacy of people who'd chosen to belong to each other. Richard proposed a toast, standing awkwardly in the crowded living room with a glass of modest wine. "A year ago, I thought I knew what mattered. I thought wealth was the ultimate measure of success. I thought family meant maintaining legacy and appearances." He looked at Claudia, at his grandchildren, at the gathered community who'd taught him everything his expensive education had missed. "I was wrong about everything. And I'm grateful for that. Grateful that my daughter was brave enough to choose differently. Grateful that my son-in-law was patient enough to give second chances. Grateful for these children who are teaching this old man that it's never too late to learn what really matters." "Hear, hear," Mrs. Chen said, raising her own glass. "To family, not the one we're born into, but the one we build." They drank to that, to chosen family, to second chances, to the hard work of becoming better than you were. December arrived with the anniversary of Daniel's 35th birthday, the day everything had changed. They celebrated quietly, no grand gestures, no dramatic revelations. Just a small cake Tommy had helped Claudia bake, slightly lopsided but made with love. Just presents that focused on thought over cost. Just the four of them in their small apartment, plus Richard, who'd become a permanent fixture in their lives. 1 year ago today, Daniel said, holding Grace while Tommy leaned against Claudia, I thought I was ending my marriage. Thought I was walking away from someone who couldn't change. I'm glad you were wrong, Tommy said. I like having Mom. Both moms. Grandma Sarah and Mom Claudia. Me too, buddy. Claudia wiped her eyes. 1 year ago, I was the worst version of myself. Cruel and shallow and measuring everything by the wrong standards. And you gave me a chance to be better. Thank you for that. Thank you for seeing something worth saving. Thank you for proving there was something worth saving. Richard, holding Grace's tiny hand in his larger one, cleared his throat roughly. 1 year ago, I thought my daughter had made the biggest mistake of her life. Turns out the only mistake was mine, spending 32 years teaching her all the wrong lessons. But we're both learning better now. That night, after Tommy and Grace were asleep, after Richard had gone home to his new, modest townhouse, Daniel and Claudia stood on their small balcony watching winter stars. Do you ever regret it? Daniel asked. Giving up the estate, the money, the life you were raised to live? Not even for a second. Claudia leaned against him. I have everything that matters. A son who chose to trust me. A daughter who'll grow up knowing that character matters more than bank accounts. A husband who believed in the person I could become. A father who's learning that love is measured in presence, not presents. What could possibly be better than that? Nothing, Daniel agreed. Absolutely nothing. Inside the apartment, their home that measured wealth in laughter and handmade art and the particular chaos of loving people more than things, Grace stirred in her bassinet. Claudia went to her, lifting their daughter with practiced ease, settling into the rocking chair by the window. Daniel watched his wife rock their baby, while Christmas lights from neighboring apartments cast soft colors across the room. Tommy's artwork covered the refrigerator. Toys were scattered across the floor. Dishes from dinner sat in the sink, waiting for morning. It was imperfect and real and messy and beautiful. This was what $10 million couldn't buy. This authenticity, this hard-won peace, this family built on choice rather than obligation. The money sat in the bank, mostly untouched except for donations to causes that mattered, and a college fund for the kids. It had served its purpose, not by providing comfort, but by exposing character, by revealing who people really were when the pretense dropped away. The prenup that had once symbolized everything wrong with their marriage now sat in a drawer, voided and meaningless, replaced by partnership and equality and the daily choice to love each other better. Claudia had become the mother Tommy needed and the partner Daniel deserved. Richard had become the grandfather his grandchildren would remember with affection rather than fear. Even Evelyn's absence had become a kind of gift, teaching them that sometimes the most loving thing families can do is let each other choose different paths. Christmas Eve arrived with snow and the magic of Tommy's excitement about Santa and Grace's first Christmas, even though she was too young to understand. They decorated their modest tree with ornaments from the dollar store and creations Tommy had made. Richard came bearing gifts he'd clearly agonized over. Nothing extravagant, everything chosen with specific people in mind. A science kit for Tommy, a handmade quilt for Grace from a local artisan, a framed photo for Claudia of the four of them at the park, natural and happy. No staging or performance. I've learned something this year, Richard said as they sat around the small living room, wrapping paper scattered like colorful snow. The best gifts cost time, not money. Attention, not dollars. Presents, not presents. Took you long enough, Claudia teased gently. Better late than never, Richard agreed. That night, after Richard left and Tommy finally fell asleep, Daniel and Claudia sat together on the couch, Grace sleeping between them, and talked about the year that had transformed them all. If you could go back, Claudia asked, to that night in my parents' house when you signed the prenup, would you change anything? Daniel thought about it. No, because if I'd walked away then, you wouldn't have had the chance to become who you are now. Tommy wouldn't have a mother. Grace wouldn't exist. Your father wouldn't be learning that legacy is measured in changed hearts rather than stock portfolios. So the prenup was worth it? All that pain and humiliation? It revealed the truth about your family, about you, about what happens when people choose money over character. But it also created the possibility for something better, for you to choose differently, for all of us to learn what really matters. Claudia looked down at their sleeping daughter. I want her to grow up knowing this story, knowing that her mother almost chose wealth over love, that her grandfather learned to value people over profit, that families can be broken and rebuilt stronger. "We'll tell her," Daniel promised. "When she's old enough to understand, we'll tell her everything. The good, the bad, the transformation. So she knows that people can change, that second chances matter, that money exposes character, but it's what you do with that exposure that defines you." Christmas morning dawned bright and cold. Tommy woke them at dawn, excited about presents that had nothing to do with their price tags. Grace wore the pumpkin outfit she'd grown into, gurgling happily while her brother opened gifts with meticulous care, studying each one, expressing genuine gratitude. Richard arrived mid-morning, bearing breakfast from Tommy's favorite bakery. They ate together, the five of them, in their small kitchen that barely fit them all. And it was perfect, not because of what they had, but because of who they'd become. As winter afternoon faded into evening, as Grace slept and Tommy played with his new science kit, and Claudia helped Richard understand social media enough to see pictures of his grandchildren anytime he wanted, Daniel felt a profound sense of peace. They'd rebuilt from ashes. From a marriage based on contempt to one based on respect. From a family divided by wealth to one united by choice. From measuring success in dollars to measuring it in laughter, in Tommy's easy affection, in Grace's innocent trust, in Claudia's genuine transformation from who she'd been raised to be to who she'd chosen to become. Money hadn't saved them. It had exposed them, tested them, revealed them. But character had rebuilt them. Love had sustained them. Choice, the daily, difficult choice to be better than circumstances suggested they should be, had transformed them. The prenup that had once promised Claudia control of everything now meant nothing, because what mattered couldn't be controlled or divided or signed away in legal documents. Love, real love, the kind built on authenticity and earned through consistent choice, couldn't be prenuptiated. As evening settled over their small apartment, as the neighborhood kids played in the new snow and Christmas lights twinkled from every window, Daniel Hart looked around at his family, chosen and biological, broken and rebuilt, imperfect and real, and understood that they'd found the only wealth that mattered. Not money, but meaning. Not possessions, but presence. Not status, but substance. They'd learned the hardest lesson life could teach, that character, not capital, determined worth. That people, not portfolios, created legacy. That the best inheritance you could give your children wasn't money in a trust fund, but values they could carry through life, guiding them toward what actually mattered. In their small rental apartment, with secondhand furniture and handmade decorations, with a son who'd learned to trust again, and a daughter who'd never doubt her value, with a wife who'd chosen transformation over comfort, and a father-in-law who'd learned that it's never too late to become who you should have been all along, Daniel Hart had everything. And it had nothing to do with the $10 million sitting in his bank account. It had everything to do with the 5 people gathered in this small space, choosing each other daily, building a family that measured wealth in hugs and homework help, in showing up and staying present, in the hard, beautiful work of loving each other better than they had the day before. Money had exposed their character. Second chances had revealed it. And in the end, that was the only prenup that mattered, the one they wrote daily with their choices, their presence, their fierce commitment to valuing what was real over what was easy. This was legacy. This was wealth. This was everything. And no prenup, no matter how carefully constructed, could ever capture or control what they'd built together.